the bottom of that table in 8th place. Obviously, some players under that as well. But Magnus, we're waiting for him to win a tournament, but he's still on top of that table. He is overall doing the best. Are you shocked, Yemeka?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit surprising that, he's doing so well. But, I mean, it's all about winning those matches. Yeah. And I think primarily he gets such a fantastic score on this because he has been so convincing in the preliminary stage. It is the matches is where he kind of falls short, where he loses the odd game that proves to be pretty critical.
And here we go.
Yep, we are off. Magnus Carlsen starting the game as white in this one. He did open with a queen's pawn opening. Here we see an opening called the Nimzo Indian defense. That is signified by black bringing up the dark squared bishop very early to create a pin against white's knight, and that bishop has been traded for a knight. This is all very well-known stuff. There we see Nakamura just put his head in his hands for a second. That's the type of face he makes when he's trying to remember what he studied before. This won't have come as a surprise. Hikaru Nakamura, he even had this exact position earlier in the event, in the prelims. And, OK, not just then, he's had it many times before. And Magnus Carlsen, what has he got in store? He brings his rook to the centre. Look at all of white's pieces, though, on that right side of the board. Everything's beautiful about white's position, apart from white's pieces on the bottom right there, still asleep. And meanwhile, Nakamura developing his queen. Yeah, there's been hundreds, maybe even thousands of games in this position as far as I know. I've had it myself. And, OK, the players developing very fast. Magnus there with his last move, pushing a pawn, allowing a trade of white squared bishops. If those light squared bishops come off, look at this. White's rook has had to recapture. White will never castle now in this game. White's moved both the rooks. He's lost those rights to castle. That means the stakes are slightly higher. White's king will be in the centre for the rest of the game.
Well, I'm never going to forget how hard you were on Magnus yesterday, saying you have to tuck in your king. Yeah. And again, he's not doing it.
Look at that. The king's going on a walk already. Will he put the king on the famous bong cloud square next? Maybe the white king will have to shift behind some pawns in a moment. It needs to find shelter. The white king will not survive in such an open position. But look at the clock times. We're already on move 16. Neither player has paused for thought, really. Magnus up on 17 minutes. He's gained 2 minutes since the start of this game. This is clearly preparation. We thought he was playing football all morning. Maybe he was studying some chess as well.
Yeah, well, I have to say, actually, that king move has never, ever been played. Everyone else in my database has chosen to capture the rook with a queen. So, like David says, this is serious preparation. But there is one thing, though, and that is that it has been studied. And I love this about the database. People have forgotten to uncheck the box that says...
Can you see when it was studied?
August 2020.
Well, we know Magnus would remember his studies from, 6, 7, 8 months ago.
He probably remembers what he studied 20 years ago, Kaya. Yeah, phenomenal memory, Magnus Carlsen, as he showed us all recently in a video challenge. And Nakamura now is the first one to think. That's very logical. He has a huge amount of time right now, Nakamura. Lots of pieces have been traded. So now is the right moment to spend that time. This is one tip for everyone at home. The first moment your opponent surprises you in the opening, or in general, if they play a move that just feels a bit odd to you, it makes your senses tingle, then stop and pause. That shows it's a critical moment. Trust those instincts. Stop, pause, work things out, calculate. If you can't remember, Nakamura trying to recall things right now. If you can't remember, just try and work things out. And Nakamura, if he can't remember his analysis, then he will just get back to basics and think, OK, let's take things logically. How do you improve the black knight, the black rook in the corner? Black currently temporarily down a pawn. How do you recapture that pawn? Lots of questions for Nakamura, and that's why he's pausing right now.
All right, well, then maybe we can take the time quickly, because I know there was a poll on Chess24 before the final started on, who is the favorite.
Yes, they were, well, Chess24 asked, and, well, the readers and the users of Twitter basically delivered. They think that Magnus is going to be a convincing 82%.
82%, and the bar we see below there is Shakhriyar versus Levon. I think
that is a little bit closer, 65% in Shakhriyar's favour.
All All right, of course, we're going to update you on what's happening in the battle for third place as well. But this is the most interesting right now. And Hikaru, okay, we had a move.
Yeah,
had a few moves.
Such a surprising move as well. Jovanka, yeah, this one to me, it's almost mind-blowing, just what White has done. If we bring up the analysis board to show what Magnus Carlsen's opening idea that he's prepared in advance, this is the position just a couple of moves ago. Here, every time this position had been reached in chess history, White had recaptured this rook with the queen. It's very sensible, keep the king in the center, but Magnus says no, he takes it with the king instead. And the reason he did this is because now, after Black's recaptured the pawn with his queen, Magnus stepped forward again with his king. To me, this wouldn't even cross my mind. This king is still on an open line, about to get checked. The reason Magnus is doing this is to free up his own rook, to bring the white rook across, to attack and harass the black queen, but it just feels so strange. Surely this must be something he found with a computer, because for any humans, it was just impossible. It's so anti-intuitive to come up with a move like this, putting your king in the center, and he must have worked out the consequences of black now, maybe trying to bring a rook to the center, giving check.
I can tell you, David, you know, you mentioned the words computer, and I can tell you, you are spot on, because you said that this is so crazy, but it's actually here in the database as being analyzed. And that king move, which just would not be on the radar of a human, it's here. And I can tell you what the person has looked at here for the black side. They have only considered the move picking up the knight, not the knight square that you suggested, but the other knight to support the remaining knight. So this has been analysed, and White's intention is actually to pick up the rook and attack the queen. And there the analysis ends.
Interesting, and I see in this current position, Jovanka, one fascinating idea for black. White's rook is attacking the black queen, but you can ignore it. What happens now if black just moves the rook across? The black rook can shift, and this is why I hate the idea of having White's king in the middle, because look at this king suddenly. White can win a queen. White can play rook takes queen, but after black's knight recaptures, look at this. Check, and an attack against the queen as well. Double attack. And black would be in control. There's one final trick here. If white tries to get the queen, sacrifice the queen back for the rook, balancing out the material, the black doesn't capture the queen like this. He captures the queen with a lesser piece, with a knight. Check. A fork against both these two pieces, and black will win. So, yeah, it's hairy, scary stuff by Magnus Carlsen, but he's clearly planned it in advance. He just plays this king move, planting his king in the center, and he will have worked out the consequences. He will avoid that line that we just showed. I'm not sure how he will, though. He's got more surprises in store.
Definitely, I think you need some patience to be good at chess, right? For example, the last trick you showed there, David, with the knight that could, you know, jump in and fork the queen and the king, because it's so tempting to just go ahead and take.
Yeah, if you see a move, look for a better one. That's the saying. But, yeah, it would have been very tempting to take in that position. It's not a bad move, but sometimes there are even better ones, and that type of thing is probably going through Nakamura's mind right now, and he does play the move that Jovanka said was analysed in the past.
Magnus again playing the move that was analysed in August.
Really?
Okay, yes, and now we're going to see whether Hikaru is up to those dirty little tricks.
Well, we remember in August, wasn't it in August, September, these two played the final in the Magnus Carlsen Tour, the sort of the predecessor to the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. And he was facing Hikaru in that final, so do you think Magnus has analysed this to face Hikaru maybe, and then didn't use it then, using it now?
Could very well be. I mean, I completely agree with you, Kai. It is a possible scenario. It's also a possible scenario that it could be anyone else, because this opening does result from something that is pretty mainstream. But okay, Hikaru didn't actually play the move that was suggested by David. It was a very, very sneaky attempt, and instead has just given a check with the queen, and Magnus Carlsen very quickly just moves with the king to the center.
Yeah, the rook move I suggested, I'm not sure it was actually good, but it was so tempting to set that sneaky trap. In the end, Nakamura, he didn't spend too much time there. He just decided, okay, let's keep things as simple as possible. Black's queen was attacked. Why not move it with check? But now look at the white king. The white king suddenly is tucked away behind some pawns at least. White's king much safer than it was a couple of moves ago. And we do call that the bomb cloud square, that white king sitting nice and safe behind some white pawns. Nakamura, meanwhile, jumping forward with the black knight, attacking white's queen. How will Magnus react? He can run away with his queen to a safer square. He can even offer a trade of queens. That wouldn't be out of character for Magnus Carlsen. We know he does like his endgame. So this is the first time Magnus really pausing. Look at his time, 17 minutes. He's gained so much time on the clock since the game began. But, okay, he barely pauses this time either. He does offer that trade of queens, going for his beloved endgame. If the queens come off, actually, white's king is perfectly placed in the center. That's where kings want to be when queens have left the board. So sneaky, long-term ideas here by both sides, but especially by Magnus Carlsen having planned this all in advance, just aiming for a small, long-term advantage.
And while we're waiting for Magnus to respond to Hikaru's last move, you know, considering whether to trade queens or not, I do have to show you a picture by Mr. Dodgy, who basically sums up the mood between Magnus and Hikaru, where he says, "Here we go."
Oh, wow.
And it kind of really brings to mind the whole scenario, the whole atmosphere, and especially what it's like to face Magnus Carlsen, the triple world champion, over the board. And of course, we are asking for our quiz of the day. If you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And we already have some answers. Justin Bourgeois says, I would have a few drinks, so I would be able to play freely. And Sarcastic Cobra says, well, he would probably go through the latest new in chess because there's no way to win, even after preparing. Well, I think that's a good idea. Get yourself into the spirit of playing like a very strong player. And finally, I'm just going to scroll across. Oh, no, I don't have a name. Sorry, yeah. I'll get to the last tweet when I have my name, but yeah.
There is actually a dilemma that I heard on a radio program in Norway, and it goes like this. So would you rather spend 10 years in prison or be in prison until the day you have beaten Magnus Carlsen in a game of chess? And everyone's like, 10 years in prison, 10 years in prison. And I'm like, it would be much more fun to be in prison if you have a goal. But how long do you think I would be in prison if I answered that I would be there until I beat Magnus Carlsen in chess?
Just a few weeks, Claire. I think you'd be okay. Just some really intense training and he's stand a decent chance.
Yeah, and okay, I have the name for the final tweet. It is Love Me Some Boncloud, who will be very, very happy with the king being on e2. He says, I would prepare a unique way to resign so that I will be noticed. Yeah, well, if you're going to go down in style. That is his attitude. And if you do want to enter our quiz of the day, remember, you have to use the hashtag #ChessChamps. Opera, #Opera, and #NewInChess. And the big question is, if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare?
Yeah, I like that picture earlier by Mr. Dodgy of the two warriors.
So cool.
I think that was from Game of Thrones, the Clegane brothers, the Hound and the Mountain battling it out. And
Sauron.
yeah, these two, these two are definitely Titanic warriors as well.
Yeah, but back to the game, David, because I see the queen has been swapped off, and we're now having, well, what basically Magnus loves, and everyone else doesn't love as much, the endgame.
True. Some players don't like the endgame too much, but Nakamura, he is very versatile. He's a universal player. He plays all different types of positions very well. And Nakamura, especially in recent years, he goes towards positions where there's minimal risk, where he has a lot of choice, a lot of options on every move. Those viewers who have seen Nakamura's stream, you can see how quickly his brain works, how many options he considers in every possible position. And this type of position, although Black is the one fighting for equality, Black is the one fighting for the draw, he does have a lot of choice of moves. Black can move his king towards the center. He can maybe relocate the black knights. He can just bring his black rook up one square. Lots of choice for Nakamura. He is quite significantly lower on the clock. And body language-wise, Nakamura doesn't look too happy, but he does eventually come up with a move. That move is to push a pawn forward. That one, it gains a bit of space, and it does stop white from advancing pawns on that left flank. But look at black's 2 pawns on that left side of the board. They're both on dark squares. Later on, they will be targets, probably easy targets for the white bishop. So just watch out for those 2 pawns to be attacked later on. That must be Magnus Carlsen's long-term winning plan. For now, Magnus will just be aiming to kick back the black knights if he can, because those 2 black knights, they're holding everything together for black.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. I too would be looking at destabilizing those black knights in the center. They're a little bit too well placed, especially the one that's blocking my rook. Well, it's interesting actually, because I was listening to Hikaru do an interview about Magnus Carlsen. I think it was immediately after he lost to Magnus in the big Magnus Carlsen chess tour final, and he kind of mentioned that he considers himself to be a good defender, but he considers Magnus to be that slightly bit better at most things, like slightly bit better at kind of grinding out the end game, slightly bit better out of putting pressure. And when you're facing someone like that, he felt that the only option was to mix things up, to kind of play a little bit tricky.
Do you think that he's been playing a bit tricky so far, Nakamura?
No, I think he's been caught in an opening preparation.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just take a look at the clock times and you can see, well, Magnus up until recently had more time than he started with. But now there is a big question for Magnus. I think the game has now developed into territory that Magnus is perhaps a little bit unfamiliar with, and he will start to put pressure on Hikaru. You mentioned like destabilizing the knights. I mean, how would you go about kicking them back?
Yeah, okay, Magnus Carlsen, he does advance the white rook. If we bring up the analysis board to show why he did this, Magnus simply wants to support this pawn push, pushing this pawn forward. It's important to use the rook to guard this square as well, because black was previously controlling it twice. And after this rook move, for example, if black just plays a bit slowly, maybe it brings the king towards the center, white will push forward now with his own pawns. And as soon as this knight leaves, as soon as this knight is forced to retreat somewhere, suddenly white will have access later on to maybe this square or this square once you kick this knight away as well. Actually, once you kick one black knight back, the other knight can get kicked back as well. And suddenly, both of these knights, if they're both forced to retreat, you can compare the activity of the pieces. These 2 pieces, terrible, passive. These pieces, white's bishop, fantastic. White's knight, glorious in the middle of the board. An octo knight, and yeah, white would be in full control. So Magnus bringing this rook forward. Personally, he bringing it forward like this. Personally, I would have preferred to jump in with my knight, just asking this rook some questions. But Magnus, after lifting his rook, Nakamura reacts by just lifting his own rook. Okay, it makes sense. He's just putting his rook on a light square, because otherwise it would have been a target for white's bishop, and Magnus pushing the other pawn. So now look at this, preparing to push this one, attacking black's knight here, and preparing to push this one, attacking black's knight here. Magnus just keeping all of his options open, and sooner or later, those 2 black knights, they'll need to find new homes.
Yeah, and I think it's that rook lift that Magnus did is probably the key move, because you couldn't go about kicking those knights away without that rook move. Now Hikaru plays a move that I was tempted to play, which was basically just fix those pawns on the left and just prevent their advance, because you mentioned, you know, and it was very, very unpleasant to see actually this whole pawn advance.
Yeah, so now it's impossible for white to push this pawn forward and attack the black knight because of a move that we call en passant. Black's pawn, because it's advanced to its 5th rank, it can actually capture the white pawn as if it just moved 1 square. So although the pawn has moved 2 squares, because it was the pawn's first go, you can act as if it just moved once, and you can capture this pawn, and this would obviously favor black. So right now, that was impossible. Magnus instead brings his knight to this side. Maybe later on, after you kick back this knight, for example, if the black king moves, once you kick back this knight, white's whole idea is to reroute the knight to this square and target black's pawn in his half of the board. So this pawn right now, it is a bit of a lone warrior, a lone wolf, and it is a target for white's pieces. Magnus Carlsen maneuvering quite well.
And we do see that Magnus, he has one knight and a bishop. Hikaru got those two knights. And here you would prefer the bishop and the knight.
Personally, yes, the black knights, they look fantastic, but they're not 100% stable. They will get kicked away. They're not on permanent outposts. Whereas white's bishop doesn't look like it's doing much right now, but later on, you could imagine it zooming up this dark square diagonal, maybe attacking one of black's pawns on the left side. Right now, also the king placement. White's king is better than the black king, nicely centralized, ready for any race later on. White's king can dart to the left, dart to the right. Also, the rooks. White's rook slightly more active than the black rook. It's all a lot of small things, but together they build up into something bigger. And surprised by Nakamura's last move, just pushing a pawn to that square, putting a pawn on a dark square. I'm not sure why he's done that. Maybe he has a plan a bit later on, but Magnus, is he considering pushing a pawn in the center, just kicking that black knight back, kicking it away? That must be what he's pondering right now.
So is it when the queens leave the board, that's when you want your king not tucked away, but joining the action?
Yes.
So that's the cue for the king, queens off, I'm going to join the war.
When there's no danger for the kings, then that is the cue. The king has to come out and has to start joining in the action, as you said. But if there's like a lot of danger, for instance, there's rooks on the board, then you've got to be a little bit cautious, and you've got to be especially cautious of getting your king trapped in what we call a mating net, which is where the pawns basically encage the king.
Yeah, so white's king, it does look pretty safe right now. It's not in an open line, it is sheltered by a few pawns, so despite the fact it is in the center, it does feel relatively safe. Black's king would love, actually, to just shuffle out towards the center, maybe sit next to the black rook. It just helps control squares. Kings are useful pieces, and especially, I mean, it's quite likely at some point we might see a trade of knights, and if that happens, one of the kings might have a route further into the center of the board, especially if the rooks come up as well. Kings can just roam freely and start attacking pawns themselves. So, okay, Magnus, decision to make. Personally, I would be tempted to push a pawn, kick black's knight away from the center. The other move that's quite tempting is to finally utilize that white bishop. Bring it up, actually, in front of the black rook to attack black's knight, and that would also drive one of black's knights back. Tempting options for the world champion.
I must admit, I would be tempted by the very direct bishop move, which has a very clear-cut plan, which is attack the knight, drive him back. I like it.
Yeah, the more I look at it, the more I like that move as well, actually.
I mean, it's threatening the king a little bit too, isn't it?
Exactly. If the black knight in front of the white rook moves, if it retreats, suddenly white's rook can jump into the position, eyeing up the black king. Okay, Magnus chooses to attack that knight with a pawn, keeping that bishop move maybe in reserve for later on. I think Nakamura, he has a key decision to make. I think he has to jump forward with his knight, giving check. If you retreat with the black knight right now, the knight's just on a bad circuit. It's got no good squares to jump to later on. It's just too passive. So I think he has to jump forward, giving check, allowing white's bishop to capture that knight. But we'll see. Nakamura definitely under pressure on the board. And actually, we do notice just below the players' cameras, Stockfish moves. Stockfish is the computer, the genius behind the evaluation bar, showing us what the objectively best moves are. And there it does think that black should jump in with the knight, giving check to the white king. Other moves would increase white's advantage.
All right. Is it one of those obvious moves for a player, or is it hard to find?
It's obvious, I think. There's two candidate moves here, two moves to keep that black knight safe. One of them is to retreat, but nobody likes retreating, right, in chess. It's, okay, apart from Nakamura, clearly.
Oh, the timing of that one.
And you can see the face he made. It's not what he wanted to do, but he decided he had to do it anyway. Yeah, it's just not human instinct to retreat. It's like in battle. Chess is very much like war. You don't want... it just feels like an admission of defeat if you start bringing all your pieces back. And now the two knights, they're sitting on dark squares. It's quite likely Magnus Carlsen will jump in with his bishop now. He can actually attack both of black's knights at the same time. I'm not necessarily sure it's the best move, but it's so tempting right now. Magnus, having a think, he's got plenty of time. And this is his dreamland, Magnus Carlsen. We've seen him outmaneuver opponents so many times before in this type of scenario, this type of endgame.
Do you think Magnus is sitting there now with just a great feeling of how this final is starting for him?
He'll be, he'll be happy, he'll be confident. I think that's the main thing. He's got his type of position. He's in his comfort zone. So, yeah, I mean, he won't be counting his chickens. He won't be thinking, OK, I've won today's match or anything. But, yeah, I think he will be very happy. So the two moves that I'm looking at right now for Magnus, one of them is to jump forward with his bishop to this square. If white jumps forward, note how the bishop is actually protected by white's knight, so black cannot capture it. And... OK, you're eyeing up both of these guys. It's actually more important, OK, if black brings his king forward, for example, it's more important to take this knight rather than the other one, because once this knight disappears, white has a choice. Do you take this pawn or do you take this pawn? Both of them look pretty good. And actually, maybe black can't even avoid that if he doesn't move his king. If you try and retreat this knight, if you bring it back, white can, I think, just win pretty much on the spot by just playing bishop takes knight, rook takes, and... rook takes pawn. Pawn up, and black has a bad knight, black has a bad rook. They're just doing nothing. White has an extra pawn, completely winning game. In the current position, that's the move I expect. Bring the bishop forward to this square. But the other move that is very tempting is to just trade rooks. Bring the rook across, because once the rooks disappear, white's king is ready to jump towards this side of the board. This is why we love kings in the center. White's king heading over that way, black's king doing nothing in the corner.
So basically, white has a choice of great ideas. Can either swap off rooks or just advance the bishop and just put pressure. So this is fantastic preparation by the world champion, actually. You know, very easily a good endgame. And, well, you know, our quiz of the day is if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? I would like to ask you, David, how would you do it?
So I've never played Magnus in a kind of a long match, but I've played him in one-off games, and I would just spend all night studying chess, studying openings, trying to find ways to get him out of these kind of slow endgames where he always seems to well, just outflank his opponents. And
well, so in that game in 2002, when you beat Magnus, we've been talking about that game.
I only drew. But
how did you prepare for that one?
So long ago. Magnus can remember it. I barely do. I remember being high-fived by Nakamura afterwards, but the game itself was torture. I was just trying to survive. I played him again a few years after that, and then 2009 was probably the biggest clash between us in the London Chess Classic. So I came third in that tournament, actually, behind Carlsen and Kramnik. But yeah, that game, I remember I just thought, I'm going to go back to the openings I've been playing since I was a child, because he knows everything better than me. I might as well lose on my own terms. And I managed to hold that game and make a draw, but yeah, he beat me a few times in the years after that.
Well, how about you then, Ivanka? How would you prepare?
Well, I would kind of take basically, you know, Magnus Carlsen plays anything and everything, so I would not be there studying every hour of the night. I would instead just pick a few lines, perhaps the sharpest lines, and then I would go fresh my memory on that, and then I would just try to turn up fresh to the board. What about you, Kaya? As a if you were given 2 weeks to prepare for Magnus Carlsen.
Well, I would kidnap you two and have you in my apartment, give you a nice bed, both of you. I would treat you very nice, give you food every day, and force you guys to teach me, you know, a trick or two.
We should do that anyway, I think.
Yeah, we actually should, yeah.
Well, we have some great answers, actually. And Giuseppe Tironi says that if he had to prepare for a match against Magnus Carlsen, I wouldn't aim for victory, but just to draw. So I'd prepare to make him laugh. And there you can see a picture.
Good idea.
And Wonton says, for preparation against a match with Magnus, I would work on my aim to throw paper at him until he says, okay, this is pretty annoying, and resigns. Thanks for the idea, David. And Manny says, to prepare against Magnus, I would simply study all of his games 6 months prior to our match. And yeah, that would be the hard-working approach.
That would take a lot of time.
Yes.
Ooh, how many games do you think Magnus has played?
Lots.
If we're only thinking over-the-board classical games, are we still talking like thousands, 10,000s?
just the thousands, I think, not tens of thousands, in the low thousands over the board, classical chess. But if you count rapid, if you count blitz, if you count his online games, he plays hundreds of bullet games, 1-minute games a week. That's a lot.
Yeah, then we're almost up in the millions.
Exactly. It's going to take at least 6 months. And, yeah, I've just thought of something. Maybe just get him the biggest box of noodles ever during the game to try and distract him.
Well, because he seems to get out of focus.
Well, on that subject, we did have a tweet from Martin Ferenczi, who says the key to beating Magnus is getting the pasta order timed correctly. I only need to get his address. And yeah, that's absolutely true. And so we are asking for a quiz of the day. If you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And to enter our competition, you have to tweet using 3 hashtags: chess champs, opera, and new in chess. And yeah, definitely looking forward to hearing your answers. And well, David,
into 6 minutes, Magnus was thinking?
Yes.
Huge thing. He had a big time advantage earlier on, Magnus. He had actually almost an 8-minute advantage on the clock earlier in the game. Now he's down on the clock. But he does come up with a good move. Not the move that I was highlighting earlier, bringing the bishop to attack Black's knight. Instead, Magnus has a different target in mind. He brings the bishop to attack a black pawn. That black pawn undefended right now. And there, below the players' cameras, again, we see the top computer suggestions. Actually, the engine, the computer thinks Black is about to lose a pawn, but Nakamura finds the best move. He just ignores the attack against that pawn. He tried to get active with his black knight on the right side of the board. That's why Magnus stepped up with the pawn immediately. He didn't even think there. He stepped forward with the pawn to stop Black's knight on the right side entering the position. So Black's knight has had to instead attack the white rook via the center. Magnus now with a very nice choice to make, a very pleasant choice. He can either just move the rook, which makes sense, or he can use his bishop to capture that black knight that has just moved in the center. Black's pawns would be doubled and weak long term. What would you do, Ivanka? Ignore that, just move the rook, or would you capture that knight?
It would be tempting for me to not capture. I don't think I would like to do that. I think instead I would simply retreat the rook. But I'm going to be very careful with where I retreat the rook because I do not want to be attacked. So I would retreat it perhaps 2 squares.
Yeah.
2 squares just to prevent the knights from hopping in and making mischief, because knights are crafty creatures and they can really cause a lot of movement and danger, especially with their unique circular moves. Yeah, what would you do, David? Would you just capture the knight?
Yes.
Well, okay, well, Magnus has spoken and David has spoken. Capture the knight. I mean, and then your idea would be to retreat the knight?
Yep, so White's knight can actually just drop back below the white rook, attacking Black's pawn in the corner there. Black's pawn on the left-hand corner. It is a bit of an intruder into White's side of the board. It's only defended by Black's knight. Magnus can attack it for a second time with his own knight. It's still not entirely clear. He has to deal with Black potentially trying to get active with the black rook. Maybe Black's knight can jump forward later on, trying to support the black rook dropping down to give White check. So Black does have ideas of his own right now. It's not completely easy for Magnus to press forward with his advantage without any risk. But okay, in the end, he does drop back that knight. Black's pawn is under attack in the corner of the board. Nakamura, he has to either defend it, which is not a move he wants to play. He can bring the rook across all the way to the side and defend that black pawn. It is a bit passive. Or if he's feeling more ambitious, he'll just sacrifice that pawn. Let Magnus waste 2 or 3 moves, taking that pawn and retreating back with his pieces. And instead, Nakamura will go on the counter-attack. Let's see what type of mood he's in.
And I want to mention that the first game between Mamedyarov and Aronian in the battle for 3rd place has ended up with a win for Levon Aronian. So a great start for Aronian. And I have to say, he's been looking really good in the knockout stages. You know, knocking out Wesley So in spectacular fashion, basically, in the quarterfinals. And it was so close for him against Magnus as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he scored a fantastic result against Wesley So. We've seen Wesley So being incredibly impressive. And Levon Aronian, well, he made it look easy.
Yeah.
When it came to Magnus, I mean, the first day was so thrilling.
Yeah.
I mean, Levon Aronian scoring that clutch win at the end of day one.
That was so impressive.
Yeah, I mean, things kind of went a little bit wrong for him yesterday, but again, you don't underestimate Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, as we saw to Hikaru's
Definitely.
disadvantage. You know, there Hikaru won his first day. But then when it came to yesterday, well, we saw Mamedyarov strike back with 3 victories against Hikaru.
Yeah.
And that was incredible. I mean, he's one of the most dangerous attackers on the planet. So this, you know, underestimate him at your peril.
Yeah, I took a quick peek at how that game finished, and Aronian came up with a really nice idea to trap Mamedyarov's queen. So definitely worth a look at some point. But okay, meanwhile, Nakamura is the one thinking. Look at the clock situations. Magnus only with 2.5 minutes, Nakamura with only 4 minutes. The last few moves, they have cost the players an enormous amount of time. And I still feel the critical moments, they're ahead. This game hasn't been decided yet, despite the fact that the computer still likes White, despite the fact White is about to win a pawn. Look at this, Nakamura jumping into White's position with his knight. Jovanka mentioned it, knights are the worst pieces to have around your king when you're low on time. There are so many pitfalls, there are so many traps, forks, double attacks that you have to avoid. And Magnus, he goes for a pawn. White's knight has captured. And note how Black can't actually just bring the pawn forward on the left-hand side, attacking White's rook and knight, because White would be able to break that double attack by bringing the White rook up to the top of the board, giving check. So nothing's falling apart for White here, but Nakamura, he's doing a good job of going active with his pieces. Black's rook can maybe even drop down and give check to White's king right now. Still lots of choice for Nakamura. He's finding great moves to defend this game. But he needs to be accurate because he is a pawn down.
And the clock is ticking here as well, David, which is an extra pressure because, as you mentioned, there are quite a few choices for Hikaru in this position. I mean, is it tempting for you to bring the rook down and just get active with the rook, or would you be looking at a slower approach?
Yeah, I don't think you have too much time for a slow approach. I would be looking for direct checks, captures or threats. And I see 2 obvious moves. One is to bring the rook down, giving check to the White king. Second one is to maybe push that pawn on the left side, attacking White's rook and knight, at least forcing White to give a check, forcing White to remove the knight later on. The consequences of that one, they're not clear. That's why Nakamura is looking off to the side now. He's got that variation in his mind. He's doing some calculation.
Shall we show it on the board?
Let's show it on the board. If we can keep an eye on the players as well, I think Nakamura about to make a move. Okay, he does push this pawn, as we showed, as we mentioned even. Attacking the rook, attacking the knight. White has to move one of them, and why not move the rook with a check? The king steps forward, and now White's knight tries to trade itself off. For the opponent's knight, Nakamura jumping forward, giving check, the rook defended, and now capturing a pawn, defending his knight. So pawns are level right now. Magnus gives another check, and okay, there's the option at least for Magnus Carlsen to take this pawn with his knight. Another one he can try is stepping back and taking this pawn with his knight. Black's pawn's very, very weak, but at the same time, Black has 2 active pieces. I think Black should be able to hold this game if he's accurate. But Magnus still in charge. He's still the one on the front foot if he finds the right move with his knight. I think he has to go for this one, dropping the knight back and taking this pawn.
Why is it better to take that pawn than the pawn on the sort of the far behind pawn?
Yeah, good question, Kaya. I think if you take this one, your knight looks very nice, but I don't know, somehow it feels like if your knight gets distracted later on, Black's knight combined with this pawn are going to form a really strong formation.
Yes, I was going to say, David, in that position, instead of moving the knight, you can...
Okay, well, Magnus takes that pawn.
Okay, he takes that pawn.
He takes that pawn. Okay, so we might see some issues.
It's definitely not a bad move. And okay, rook takes pawn. Let's see what White has in mind.
So one move that I wanted to do, so when you move the knight to, just to highlight one potential pitfall, is if the White knight goes, let's challenge the Black knight. What Black can do, he can be really sneaky here and actually move his knight forward.
Wow, that is super sneaky. And look at this White king. It's got no escape squares, and actually only one move saves the game for White. You have to create some escape squares by pushing your pawn forward so you can run away here, because actually if you don't, if you ignore it, then Black's rook will give you checkmate. This is how tricky rooks and knights can be together. You can think you're 100% safe. You can think the queens are off the board. I'm never going to get checkmated. And suddenly this happens. Yeah, both sides still have to be careful. And actually, in the current position, the black king cannot move either. So black's king also has some potential issues. Magnus, if he wants to play safe, he can always flick in a check against the black king and then bring the knight back and repeat the position, because I don't think black's king can run away from those checks. Instead, Magnus going for glory, trying to take this pawn if he can. And your idea, Jovanka, it is in the air. Maybe black can threaten checkmate by bringing his knight down and bringing the rook across.
Yeah, he's done it. Okay, so checkmate is in the air, and very quickly Magnus pushes the pawn to give some space for this king. You know, instant response. But okay.
So now the king under fire, it has to step back. No matter where it goes, it might get checked. If you go this way, black's knight will check you from this side. If you go this way, the knight will fork your king and your pawn. I think Nakamura is going to hold this game. It's only 3 pawns left each. That's simply not enough to win. Remember, even if one side loses their knight, if all of the pawns disappear, it's not enough material left to checkmate. So right now, Nakamura defending very well. Okay, he does give a check. Meanwhile, white's king has to step to the side. How will Nakamura defend this one? I expect to see him just play pawn takes pawn right now. You don't want to allow white's pawn in the center there, slightly to the right of the center, to keep marching up the board. You have to take it off. Okay, he's pausing though. Maybe there's a hidden trap. I don't see it. What do you think, Jovanka? Can black just play pawn takes pawn?
Okay.
Wow.
He doesn't. He attacks the rook. Maybe this is just an intermediate move, just to give himself some extra time. But okay, this does give white the possibility of capturing a pawn and even attacking the rook.
Attacking the rook, attacking the knight.
Attacking the knight. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, so white has an option. Well, white has choices. White's rook is under attack from the black knight. White's rook can step up, giving check, or it can step back a couple of squares, take a pawn. It can also just move to the side, one square, attack the black knight. All of them look pretty tempting. Magnus, with only 1 minute, though, he has to make a decision. At this point, Magnus knows probably with best play it should be a draw, but he is great at posing traps normally in these very simplified positions with not many pieces left. So he'll be looking for one way to create a trap, set a trick. And okay, there we see the computer suggestions. Magnus played maybe the second best move, but still one of the best in that position. And white has gone a pawn up, now attacking black's knight. If black's knight takes that corner pawn, check, suddenly that knight might get trapped on the edge of the board. You definitely don't want a knight on the edge. Nakamura shaking his head slightly.
Yes, I mean, but it is tempting actually just to capture that pawn and try to then eliminate as many pawns as possible, just with the knowledge that a rook and knight will not win against the rook. But okay, Hikaru doesn't do that because it was playing with fire to get your knight trapped. Instead, he gives a check, and very much the same issues are in the air. White must move with the king, moves towards the center, and are there enough? There's not enough pawns on the board, David, for it to be seriously dangerous for Hikaru.
Yeah, you're quite likely right there, Jovanka, but at least Magnus, compared to the position 3-4 moves ago, he has won a pawn, and that's a small gain at least. So, okay, white's knight can recapture that pawn. I don't see any other real options for Magnus here. White can play knight takes pawn, attacking the black rook in the corner. And, okay, what is Magnus thinking about?
Yeah,
maybe he's
42 seconds left on the clock as well.
Yeah, he must be just trying to work out the consequences of taking that pawn. Maybe the only other thing white can consider here is white's corner pawn on the left side. It does have a free run towards its end goal of becoming a queen. You could imagine white's corner pawn stepping forward.
Well,
okay, he does it.
He does it, but
Knight's being notoriously bad at stopping corner pawns.
Yeah, but is this not playing with fire? Because you mentioned, yes, white has a passed pawn. Black also has one too. Okay, it can't advance just yet, but give me a few moves and I'll make it.
Yeah, so will Nakamura make it? Will he get those few moves to start advancing those black pawns? It's a bit of a race here. White is ahead in the race currently because white's corner pawn is only 4 steps away from becoming a queen. It should be stopped maybe from behind. Black's rook can drop down, give check. Or, okay, Nakamura with that last move, clearing the way for the black rook to bring itself all the way across to stop white's corner pawn. Also, black's far advanced pawn now is getting ready to move. And Okay, Magnus, bit of a strange one, pushing in the centre. It feels a bit inconsistent, pushing a corner ball and then pushing in the centre.
I think he wants to set up a mating net. I think his idea is to, if allowed, advance his rook 3 squares to cut the king's path off, and then he's going to do some magic with his knight and push the centre pawn.
Feels like a distant dream, Jovanka.
But one can hope, David. Optimism is the source of everything here. Okay, but Hikaru is, meanwhile, pushing his pawn very, very close. I mean, is this now a time for Magnus to get nervous? Magnus says no, he doesn't care. He's simply going to give the knight, the king, a check with the knight, and now... Okay, what's happening next?
Magnus has lost control. I would be getting so nervous as Magnus Carlsen right now, and actually there we see the computer suggests just moving the black king. It is under check. Moving that black king next to the white knight, attacking it. That's the most natural move in the position. I'm surprised Nakamura didn't go for that one. I don't see why he didn't, but okay. Well, maybe Magnus now, that mating net you were talking about, Jovanka, that check mating net.
It's coming.
It might be coming. Yeah, so the computer getting slightly overexcited, but there are... well, black should be able to hold the game. There are ideas, however, of white giving checkmate. Nakamura not looking happy. He missed that last move. Why didn't he bring his king forward?
It doesn't
Always
make any
advance
sense.
your king. Yeah.
Totally, David. I mean, the mating net that we're talking about basically involves white pushing the centre pawn 1 square. And suddenly you can look at that king, and the king has no escape squares off the bottom row. And with that in the air, things are going to get very dangerous. Is there a way for Hikaru to actually defend against this? Does he have to attack the rook, the knight?
I'm
getting
trying to
my
work it
rooks
out.
and knights confused at the minute.
Yeah, I think actually Nakamura needs to be really careful here. And there we see the computer suggestions below the players' cameras. Black only has 1 move. Actually, only maybe 2 moves not to lose the game. One of them is much better than all of the others, however, and that's not obvious. Pushing Black's pawn, it looks like suicide, but it does save the game. Black has to push his far advanced pawn, trying to make a new queen, ignoring White's threats, but that takes nerves of steel, because it looks like White is about to give checkmate in 2 moves by pushing that central pawn, as you mentioned, Jovanka.
Shall we show the variation, because it is really cool. Okay, so there's only 1 move, and that is to push the black pawn 1 square, and now, well, White is going to threaten checkmate by pushing his pawn, and now it looks like there is nothing that Black can do to get out of the danger, but he can throw in something that we call a desperado check, and that is to slide the rook all the way to the king. Okay, and maybe we're going to see it on the board, David.
He has to find it, and he does find it, Nakamura. That was not obvious, finding this rook move, the only move to save the game, because now, if that rook gets captured, Black's pawn promotes with check. That is the key detail, promoting with check, so White doesn't have enough time to checkmate himself. Magnus now steps across with his king to win this pawn, and, okay, it's about to happen. The knights are leaving the board, and, yeah, Black's rook giving check. The knights have disappeared, and now Black is safe, finally. Yeah, Nakamura really playing it close to the, well, close to the wire there. He has survived, however. White does have 2 pawns, but it's not enough. Black's rook will stop one, and the black king will stop the other. This should be a draw. But that was momentary fireworks, at least, on the board.
I had us all in suspense there, David. I mean, I really thought that Hikaru had perhaps lost the plot a little bit. And, okay, well... Magnus desperately trying to bait Hikaru with a rook trade, but of course Hikaru is saying, no, I'm having none of that, because whilst the rooks are on the board, the position is simply a draw.
Yeah, in rook endgames, if you're just 1 pawn ahead, often your opponent has great drawing chances, unless you can push that pawn right to the end, or unless you can paralyze your opponent's pieces, make the opponent's rook or king passive. Here, White's king just doesn't help the pawns. That's the problem. If White's king was all the way over on the left side, probably White's just winning. But White's king is just so far out of the action right now. And, okay, Magnus, note how he didn't push his pawn, because if White had pushed a pawn there, Black's rook could have zoomed the whole way across and stopped White's pawn from behind. That's where rooks are most active, when they are behind passed pawns. But, yeah, Magnus now has had to make the white rook very bad. White's rook has to stay on that 1 square, protecting both of its pawns, and meanwhile, Nakamura, yeah, he will just wait. He doesn't need to do anything. Look, Black's rook now on its perfect square behind White's passed pawn, and he can do anything now, Nakamura. He can even push the black pawn. He can just wait with the black king. Magnus has no way to keep both of his pawns alive.
Yeah, Okay, so now Hikaru has lost one of his pawns, and now Hikaru has to be very careful where he puts the king. Yep, okay, so he's gone to the center, and now the position has fizzled out.
King versus king is a draw.
Yep. No way that can be a winning position.
No more checkmates for either side.
Would Magnus Carlsen resign, or not resign, but, you know, agree a draw even against me with king against king?
He'd have to.
Yeah.
By law, he has to.
All right. So it is a draw, the first game in the final between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. Magnus with the white pieces here. It was a fun game. Who should be feeling, you know, the most happy about the start to the final?
Nakamura, I think he'll be relieved. He was caught in a piece of opening preparation. Magnus has clearly been studying that opening for weeks, months, and he did get an advantage, Magnus Carlsen.
And look at Hikaru there, just a sigh of relief.
Yeah, that was a close shave, that game for Nakamura. He did defend well, though, and he went very active. This was the key moment, actually, where Nakamura did hold the draw. Actually, in this position, I was surprised by what Magnus had been doing. I thought that the Black King should advance to hit the Black Knight. Instead, Nakamura sidestepped, and this position, we saw him pause, we saw him react, maybe even shaking his head, because Black only had one way to save the game, and he did eventually find it, Nakamura. This is why the top players are so good. Nakamura and Carlsen especially, when they need to, they do often find those key moves. And Black here, if he didn't find this one, he would have been in trouble. He would have been losing. But it wasn't just that move. After White stepped forward, threatening checkmate, and threatening to trap the Black King, Nakamura found this glorious idea. I don't think many players would find this. Even top grandmasters would struggle to visualize this one. Black brought his rook across, giving check, sacrificing, offering that rook as a gift. The whole idea is that White cannot capture it because Black would promote with check, and there's no time for White to bring the rook up and give checkmate. And after Magnus had to avoid that trap, he couldn't capture the rook after this check. He had to sidestep. Nakamura found another nice idea. He promoted his pawn, he sacrificed this pawn in order to swap the knights. And once the knights disappeared from the board, this is check. Once White's knight disappeared, it was an easy draw by Nakamura, as we saw. Because Black would promote with check, and there's no time. After Magnus had to avoid that.
They are tied after the first game in the final. Coming up in about 14 minutes is the second game with Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. All right, still 3 games to go in the first match in the final, and still a lot of fun to go in the show. Of course, after the third game, we're going to be joined by Ginger GM, Simon Williams. And coming up after the next game is another one of those celebrity charity chess challenges. So we're looking forward to that. But we are in this tournament, as you all know, talking about great moments in chess. Dirk-Jan, the editor of New in Chess, is sharing stories from over 35 years with this fantastic magazine. And today, we have arrived at the 16th and current world champion. And Dirk-Jan vividly remembers the first time he noticed a young Magnus Carlsen.
I'm probably not alone when I say that the 3 super champions of the past 50 years are Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, and Magnus Carlsen. Unfortunately, New in Chess was not yet around when Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov rose to fame, but we were when Magnus Carlsen appeared on the scene, and we followed him right from the start. And what fun it was. The first time we heard of Magnus Carlsen was when Simon Agdestein called in somewhere in 2003, and he said, "We have this special talent here in Norway, and I would love to write about him." And I said, "Does he have a title or what's..." And Simon said, no, that's all irrelevant. Titles will come, but I would like to write about him. And I, in my eternal wisdom, said, well, maybe we should wait a bit. But what I did do was, when I went to the European Club Cup in Crete in October, I had a look at Magnus Carlsen and this young boy beating grandmasters there. And of course I couldn't miss to see him in Weigandsee in 2004, January, where he sensationally won the C group. And in fact, a couple of months later, I was convinced that he was going to be the next world champion. Now, Magnus has said that he doesn't believe that it was possible to see that at that point. But I tend to disagree. There was not only his remarkable game and the way he played, which was so impressive, but there were also other signs that convinced me that something really special was going on. One of them was when Magnus played a brilliant game against Ernst in Wijk-aan-Zee, and afterwards he was taken to the commentary pavilion to talk about his game, and Grandmasters Hans Rey and Gennis Ozonko, they were there, and they asked Magnus what he would have played suppose Ernst had defended differently. And Magnus's look was just priceless. This, don't you see? Should I explain? And he showed how he would have won the game in case Ernst had defended differently. Another thing happened a month later in Moscow when he was playing in the Aeroflot Open and beating one Russian grandmaster after the other. At some point I was following his game amid a throng of Russian fans, and suddenly someone touched me on the arm, and I looked around, and there was Alexander Nikitin, the famous coach of Garry Kasparov, and he had just one word to say: beautiful.
Of course, we recommend getting a subscription for the new In Chess magazine. Now, Magnus Carlsen has done a good job rating all the world champions that we have asked him, but he was a little surprised when we finally asked him to rate the current world champion himself.
I really thought we were done. Apparently we weren't, because there's one more world champion to consider after Anand, and that is unfortunately yours truly. In terms of genius though, I don't consider myself a genius in general. I think in chess terms I should score fairly highly, because I believe quite naturally talented, so I'm gonna give an 8 here. In terms of being entertaining, obviously I'm an extremely entertaining person. Like, my jokes are drier than wood, and I have some things going for me, I think, in terms of entertaining on the chessboard, in that I'm open to trying new ideas, I'm always fighting towards the very end, but I also understand that my style is still slightly geared towards longer games, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. But I think still an 8 is pretty fair here. I'm probably more on the Anand side here, of not necessarily coming up with the ideas myself and being more of a follower than a creator. There has obviously been a bit of a chess boom in Norway, so that helps. But I think influence is not my greatest strength, so I'm gonna go with a 7 here. In terms of sanity, you know, I have my moments, good and bad. Overall, I think it's I'm somebody who can certainly be very upset after games. Usually it doesn't last, and there haven't been any too egregious moments so far. So I'm gonna give myself the highest grade that I get on any of these will be on sanity, and it's gonna be a very subjective 9.
No 10s on that score sheet, David. Do you sort of agree with this, or do you think he's actually being a little bit humble?
I think he's trying to be humble. I think those genius levels are pretty high.
Yeah.
I mean, up there on a par with all the other world champions. And influence, he's continuing to influence the chess world, not just in Norway, it's everywhere. I mean, this tour wouldn't exist without him, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, also he's got the rest of his career ahead of him.
Yeah. So, Jovanka, this child prodigy that Magnus Carlsen was, would you remember when you sort of noticed him or started hearing about him?
Yeah, I actually do remember. It was around about 2003 that I had names being mentioned in the Norwegian chess circuit that, Magnus Carlsen was very, very strong. And, well, I played in a Danish tournament, and I remember he was paired against one of my friends, and he drew. So I was thinking, OK, well, we'll see how this develops. And then from that slow start, he just, the momentum just grew and grew, and he just played amazing chess. By the end, we were all going, he's going to be world champion.
Wow. Yeah. How old was he then when you started?
He would have been about 12.
Wow, so that's early.
Yeah, that's very, very early. And I do remember him already at that age, like hanging around with a lot of international masters. I think Peter Heine Nielsen at that time, who was also good friends. So, I mean, yeah, and you could just see how focused he was. And the attacks he came out with as a 12-year-old were just spectacular. Just unbelievable stuff. So
such a cute
definitely.
Well.
And I have to say one thing, Magnus does kind of play down his influence, but he really is a celebrity here in Norway. I mean,
yeah,
he can't walk the streets, without someone recognizing him. And And I have to say, every single person that I know in Norway knows who Magnus Carlsen is. They all follow his results, they follow his games, and everyone is cheering him on. The highlight for me was maybe 2013 when I was catching a flight back to London, and I kid you not, nearly every Norwegian on the plane had their mobile phones out and were following his progress.
Wow, amazing. Chess becoming huge in Norway because of Magnus Carlsen. And obviously, David, you grew up with this world champion. You played against him, you played with him, you're friends with him. But what was Magnus Carlsen like as, a 12, 13-year-old when he was just starting to, as Jovanka said, become one of the biggest names?
I mean, already the seeds of who he would later become, they were already there. He was already, very friendly, very sporty, very active, always with that curious mind, wanting to find out more, not just about chess, but about sport. I remember his parents would talk about collecting these, or kind of memorizing all these flags and things like that. But as the years went on, we kind of reconnected more when we were kind of in our late teens, when he was already world #1, and you could tell he was hungry for more. He never wanted to stop winning, and yeah, it's been an honor just knowing him and playing alongside him for a Norwegian team. That was probably one of my favorite tournaments of my career, playing for Vålerenga at the European Club Cup, and just the way he brought these younger Norwegians into the team, and he was supporting them. He would stay after his games to watch their games, always giving them tips and things like that. It shows that he's not just one-track mind about winning. There's more to him, and he is very supportive of the Norwegian chess community.
And so I think many people are wondering, how long will he keep playing? How long will he be this good? Has he already reached his peak? Are we past his peak? Or do you think his peak is to come, Jovanka?
I really do think his peak is to come, if he chooses. I mean, we have to bear in mind that he is definitely, it's up to him now. I mean, the future is in his hands, but I definitely think that we can see more. We can perhaps see him break that magical number in the rating list, which is 2,900. No one's ever done that before. It would be fantastic if he did. Wow. But yeah, the problem is, I think, is that everyone is a little bit far behind him, and so he does need some competition. And I think we're going to see it actually with the World Championship match happening in November against Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is now, I think, number 4 or so in the rating list. So yeah, definitely motivational.
Yeah, I think the best form actually Magnus has ever been in, I would say, is early 2019, just after his last World Championship match against Caruana, and it was because of all the work he put in for that one. As soon as he gets a new rival, a new goal, that's when he pushes himself up a new level, and I wouldn't be surprised, as Jovanka mentions, to see it again over the next 12 months.
And of course, many people dreaming of meeting Magnus Carlsen, playing against him. And that's the question of the day.
That is the question. We are asking, if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And to enter this competition, you have to tweet your answers using 3 hashtags: Chess Champs, Opera, and New in Chess. And the prize, Kaya and David, is just amazing. It's being brought to us by by Opera, and it is a one-year subscription to New and Chess magazine. It's also a chessboard video course on 100 endgames you need to know, and a chessable video course on The Complete Swindler. But okay, we again have some fantastic answers, and here are some of them. Istiak Hussein Joy says, I will follow the David way. David, can you guess? Inevitable win for me, and it is the distraction method.
Yeah, good idea.
Definitely a great idea. And Tyler Welch says, if he had to prepare against Magnus in a match, he would try to find the trickiest and sneakiest in gambits and go all in. And as you've seen, actually, that has been a very shrewd way of playing against Magnus. Levon Aronian did that to perfection in their match.
I think against any stronger player, why not scare them? Why not attack, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Eric Solika Austin says, I would write an algorithm that would analyze all possible moves and then simply memorize them.
I'll take a few lifetimes, unfortunately. Chess is pretty vast, pretty infinite.
Yeah, well, Eric does say he is an obsessive learner, so, I mean, definitely a great idea if you manage to memorize everything.
All right, and the second game with Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen is starting. Hikaru, we hope he has prepared with the white pieces. What's happening, David?
So far, we do have the Spanish opening, and Magnus Carlsen, with that last move, bringing the black knight forward, is threatening white's pawn in the center of the board. This is called the Berlin defense, and rather than go for something we've seen in the past, Nakamura often just going for a quick draw in this opening. This time we're getting a fight. He does defend that central pawn, and white's playing very solid, very steady chess. Look how white's pawns are in the center, defending each other. Not fully advanced, but yeah, this one is shaping up to be a very nice, tense game. So it's similar to the Italian game type of opening that we saw actually a lot yesterday between Aronian and Carlsen, where it's a slow build-up, a lot of maneuvering, and the game explodes a bit later on. So far, it will, well, it's looking promising, but it will come down to who can maneuver better, who can strike first in the center of the board. We do see a bishop for knight trade, and Nakamura just developed his own knight there. This is still well-known stuff. I've had it myself several times, but I think the signs are promising. It shows Nakamura, he wants to fight, but Magnus as well. He has studied this before. He's played this type of thing in World Championship matches. Who will navigate the complications better later when they arise.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. Interesting enough, this is definitely something that Magnus is skilled in, but no one really has played that bishop takes knight capture against him in a classical game, I have to say. Because obviously on online chess, thousands of games have been played. So I think it is a good, interesting strategy by Hikaru Nakamura just to test Magnus in something that might have caught him by surprise.
Yeah, one of the most instructive games I've seen in this opening with white was between Anand, a former world champion, and Gristruk in a World Rapid Championship. But okay, this game has taken a slightly different course. White does retreat the white knight there. The reason white retreats the knight, this is actually the most common maneuver in this opening. White retreats the knight next to the king because it's about to bring itself next to the other knight. And those two white knights in conjunction, they'll keep the white king safe forever for the rest of the game. And they can also even jump forward to attack themselves. Magnus playing a bit of a strange move, retreating the black knight there. And we did see Nakamura slightly frown. Maybe that knight is headed to other squares later on.
Yeah, David, that is indeed an unusual move. You actually called it out there. It's only ever been played twice in my database. So definitely something that's completely unexpected. It actually doesn't have a score. I know the sample is low, 2 games, but, you know, in both those games, white won. And, yeah, knight to the advance. And now it's up to black. What do you think Magnus is doing with his knight?
I think he's going to copy white, and bring the black knight next to the black king, because that knight is going to jump to another square later on. So Magnus will have invested probably 3 moves with that knight by the end of this maneuver. And if your opponent plays slowly, if they start messing about, moving the same piece several times, often the best strategy is to pounce, is to attack, is to push forward. That's why Nakamura advances in the center with his pawns. I love those 2 white knights. If I can ever get those kind of that formation in chess. I just love it, and it's very solid. You can pounce, you can kind of jump forward and be aggressive at the right moments. It's so hard to break through those knights. And we do see black having the bishop pair, two bishops. So normally you don't want to open things up, but this last move, accelerating the play, quickening the pace, I think it's a great strategy. You don't want to wait until those bishops really come to life.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. And immediately, Magnus has a pressing issue on his hands because white has a threat in the position. White is threatening to play pawn takes pawn. And the centre does need to be reinforced. And Magnus answers by moving his knight yet again. But this time, the knight is supporting the pawn in the centre. What do you think, David? You like it?
I'm undecided. I'm not going to commit. Yeah, I think Magnus, his manoeuvre, there's something strange about it. There's something just very slow about that knight manoeuvre that Magnus made. The knight's not that... Well, it's not obvious that the knight is better here than it was 3 moves ago. It was 1 square to the left 3 moves ago. Often, if you do take that time out, it's too much of a luxury. And Nakamura has improved his position enormously over those 3 moves. And they're bringing out his dark squared bishop, white's bishop, knights. They all look fantastically placed. Next, white's just going to move his queen, bring the rook in the corner towards the center, and everything's perfect for white. It's less clear what black is doing. The central tension, you don't want to break it as black, because otherwise your opponent has the pawn center for free, control over lots of important squares, and Magnus, for want of a better plan, just pushes a corner pawn. Yeah, I think Magnus doing Magnus things. He's just trying to keep the tension, trying to get... just slowing down the pace of the game. He did mention in that video interview, actually, when we were talking about entertainment value, sometimes he doesn't think of himself as the most entertaining player, because he does have a style that is geared towards long grinds, long games. And I think that's what he's doing here, simply.
But somehow I often think his games are entertaining, but is that because he takes it into the end game and we get to see, fighting chess until the end?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's like David said, very adept at grinding out those small advantages, maximizing everything. And it isn't entertaining in the sense that you can get pure enjoyment from those big, flashy sacrifices and king hunts.
Yeah, because
that's thrilling.
Yeah, because Dubo would sort of be a 10 on entertaining.
Right.
Yeah.
But it still is very entertaining in the sense that how can Magnus actually outwit very, very strong opponents, and he makes it look simple. And in that kind of sense, it is incredibly entertaining, and it leaves you in awe.
That's why he's so popular as a world champion, because he does make it look simple. Magnus's games, they are accessible for everyone, even newcomers to the game, even beginners. It takes not that long to understand his plans every time, but just making them so effective, that's the real genius behind Magnus's chess. Playing simple moves, but effective moves.
And I have to just mention, so in the battle for 3rd place between Mamedyarov and Aronian, it's now tied. Aronian won the first game with the black pieces, didn't he? And then Mamedyarov won the second with the black pieces.
Wow, and I should also mention, both of those defeats were very quick. The first game, Aronian won in 24 moves as black. The second game, Mamedyarov won in 21 moves as black.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's not a good day to have the white pieces in that 3rd place playoff.
Exciting battle there. So we're going to, of course, update you on what happens there. They are tied after 2 games.
Yeah, definitely sounds like entertaining bloodbath there. Because you don't really lose with the white pieces in 21 or 24 moves. I mean, something seriously has gone wrong. But yeah, I mean, definitely we are focusing on Hikaru against Magnus Carlsen. And one thing I really liked about what you said, David, was about the simplicity and how Magnus makes it all look so easy. And of course, our quiz of the day is based on, if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And I have to say, I do quite like Max's approach. Max says one does not simply practice and beat the champ. I would just learn a very rare gambit to the limit, because the master of it, and come to the match with an Nepomniachtchi mask, hoping to create a distraction. And there he includes a picture that says, I don't always give away pawns, but when I do, I still win.
That is a nice, what do you call it, meme?
Yes.
That's like Dubov's life motto, right? Except he does always give away pawns. Yeah. Okay. Meanwhile, we have had one move by Magnus Carlsen. Bit of a risky move, actually, bringing his bishop out there, offering a trade of pawns, and it is not the typical trade of pawns. If we bring up the analysis board, we can see that Magnus, having developed his black bishop to this square, he has actually blocked the rook's defense of this central pawn. So Nakamura, he could actually just play pawn takes pawn right now, and black cannot recapture this pawn, because if he does, suddenly the black queen would be under fire. Black's queen would just drop off the board. You can't lose a queen for a rook. So if Nakamura does get greedy and capture in the center, Magnus has another pawn in mind. He won't recapture this guy, which looks like the most important pawn. He'll actually recapture the pawn in the corner with black's bishop. This is something you very rarely see in chess, a bishop capturing a pawn in the corner, because often those pieces get trapped. But black does have a sneaky idea in mind. So, for example, if white were to play pawn takes pawn, the black bishop should step back with a skewer. The queen attacks, and the rook behind it will drop off next move. So this pawn capture, Nakamura did decide against it. He didn't want this guy to get captured. He didn't want the black bishop to activate itself, so he blocks it. He pushes this pawn forward, blunting the effects of this bishop. Very sensible by Nakamura. Let's see how Magnus deals with the threat against his pawn in the center now.
Yeah, and yeah, definitely a lot of tension in the center. What would you do here, David, if you were Hikaru?
If I were Magnus...
Sorry, Magnus. What is it? I'm getting everything in reverse. Rook and knight, Hikaru, Magnus.
Because they're both equally strong. Jovanka, they're both... fantastic players. Right now, as Magnus, it's tempting to break the central tension finally, because it feels like you have to do that at some point. Black can play pawn takes pawn in the center. Another thing I would be tempted to do is just move the black queen. The black queen feels so uncomfortable on the same line as a white rook. Queens in general feel uncomfortable when eyed up by rooks, so I'm not sure where. I'm not sure what the best square for the black queen, but I think the two things Magnus will consider here, moving the black queen, or maybe just playing pawn takes pawn in the center and seeing where the chips fall after that one. Because I think you have to do it sooner or later. He can still delay it. Personally, I would just get that tension done with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would get the tension done. I mean, I like the idea of moving the black queen, but I just have to point out, you have to be very careful with where you move the black queen. David isn't suggesting that you move the black queen one square forward, because then the light square bishop gets trapped.
Yeah, actually, if we bring up the board, there's actually two bad squares for the queen right now. I want to move this queen. You don't want it in the eye line of the rook, but if you choose this square, as Jovanka mentions, white can step forward. And after a trade of pawns, you suddenly realize, oh no, my bishop's trapped, no squares to go to. And if you move the queen to another direction, if you move the queen this way, the queen gets trapped. The bishop will jump forward, and this queen has nowhere to run. It has to lose itself for just one piece. And that's why, as we see below the board there, Stockfish, the computer, does suggest a different square, but not the most obvious square, bringing the queen to this side of the board, maybe using her down this line later on, or maybe lining her up along this diagonal with the dark squared bishop. But okay, Magnus didn't move his queen in the end. He plays a move that he probably was reluctant to play. He pushes a pawn forward. Yes, he reinforces this strong point, now defended by this pawn, but long term, this might create some weaknesses around the black king. So a solid move by Magnus, but not a very active one, purely defensive at the moment, pushing this pawn.
Yeah. It's a bit surprising to me. I did not expect that. I expected him, especially having the bishop pair, that he would simply release the tension in the center, says, okay, fine, I give up on that. But, okay, Magnus is very insistent. But what is this? I mean, if I'm looking at the position, I'm thinking, hey, you know, white has two knights. What is to stop white from just advancing even further?
Yeah, exactly. And we do see below the players' cameras, again, the top computer suggestions. They're all pawn pushes, they're all pawn moves, and it is about clarifying that central tension. White has to do something in the center now. If you give black the luxury of time, if you let black move the queen, if you let black just rearrange his pieces, black's doing quite well, because long term, the bishops are going to be the best pieces. That's why Nakamura tries to speed up the game by pushing a pawn on that left side. It's not the pawn I would have pushed. Personally, I would have pushed the pawn in the center, maybe attacking one of the black bishops. There's two ways, actually. You can attack either black bishop. Those two looked more decisive. Nakamura, he goes for a different one. And now black's rook in the corner line. It has an open file. It has so many squares to use later on in the game. Magnus, I think he'll be happy to see that one.
And it almost looked like we were getting to the mean girls there with the white pawns, but...
they might be coming again.
Yeah, 3 is not enough to be mean girls. They need 4.
4 is a gang.
Yeah, 4 is a gang. Yeah.
Connect 4, that was a game from my youth where you get 4 in a row, right?
True. That is fun.
I missed that game. But yeah, so the pawn that has just recaptured for white, if it steps 1 square forward, connect 4. And yeah, the mean girls gang. Magnus will not like to see that ideally, so maybe he'll try and break up that gang by trading a pawn at some point. It's not easy for Magnus to find an obvious idea, but okay, he does bring his bishop to the side there, stopping white's pawn from advancing, creating that 4 in a row idea, and also attacking white's rook at the bottom of the board. So that white rook has sidestepped. I'm surprised it went to that square instead of stepping 1 square forward. The white rook back to where it came from a few moves ago. And Nakamura shaking his head slightly. The white rook not so actively placed. I think he will be regretting his last few moves, Nakamura. And now Magnus finds an outpost for that bishop. Knights are better on outposts, but outposts in general, if you can occupy them, it's worth doing so. And that black bishop stops the advance of several white pawns now.
Yeah, that black bishop has certainly maneuvered itself into an annoying position. Okay, so Hikaru still has his choice of plans. I mean, I would be tempted to maybe start to reorganize things, or either I would like to be consistent and just start pushing my pawns in the center, or I'm just going to perhaps shift my rook to the side. But I like to push pawns, David. I love to push them, and I want to gain space. And if possible, I would like to have a scenario where it's 2 good knights against a bishop and a knight. Okay, so the move's coming thick and fast, and Hikaru playing my second choice, which was to move the rook across to the side. It feels to me that Hikaru is a little bit wary about taking those forward steps. He just wants to minimize risk and play safety first. But, okay, against Magnus, is this maybe a dubious approach?
Quite possibly. Often the most successful players against Magnus, we've seen it in the tour already, especially players like Daniil Dubov, especially players like Pomniachtchi, who knocked Magnus out of the last tournament. They play quite aggressive, and they're not afraid to push forward because they know if the game slows down, if it turns into a longer game, those endgames, Magnus is the master. Nakamura, he did hold his own in that last endgame in the first game today, but the more we see of those types of positions, the more it will favour Carlsen. So yeah, Nakamura not pushing any pawns in the centre, just kind of maintaining the equilibrium, the status quo, not committing and challenging black's rook in the corner there. And Magnus finally steps forward with his queen.
Yeah, connecting,
solid stuff.
Definitely solid stuff, connecting the 2 rooks. And, well, we've seen Hikaru take a kind of very solid, risk-free approach in his games against Magnus Carlsen. And our quiz of the day is, if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And, of course, everyone is being incredibly original with their responses. Ashley Conn, and I think you both will like this one, says that he would prepare by challenging another grandmaster, for example, Hikaru, to a simultaneous game where I was playing the opposing side and play their moves against each other. Loving, okay, and then he compliments us on the coverage. So, yeah, thank you very much, Ashley, for your nice words. And I do like your sneaky attempt. Incidentally, there was a situation just like that in British TV. There was a mind magician called Darren Brown who challenged, how many grandmasters was it, David?
I think it was 8 grandmasters and 1 non-grandmaster.
Right. And he did the same thing. He went around playing a symbol against them, and he was playing them off against each other. So
it was clever. So they were all in a circle, but they couldn't see each other's games. So there were walls in between, so they couldn't see each other. So he would just go around, and whoever, well, he set up different colors. So he would memorize what one player would play with white on one board, then he would walk around, and he would play the same move against a different grandmaster on the other side of the hall, and he would just pair off those 8 players. They basically played against each other, so the whole world was shocked. He scored 4 points out of 8 against grandmasters, and he'd never played chess before. And then he beat the 9th player, so he got a positive score.
Yeah.
But yeah,
whoa! I have it on good authority that he beat the 9th player. with something in his earpiece.
Magicians and their tricks.
But, you know, that's the whole thing, isn't it? Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and I have to also point out, we do have another tweet from Sunny Mouse 55. Oh, well, if he had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, I'd prepare and play the Noodles Gambit. And after his victory, enjoy the noodles. Yes, and if you want to enter our quiz of the day, remember to tweet your answers using 3 hashtags, chess champs, and then hashtag opera, and then hashtag new in chess. And yeah, we love your answers so far, and we'll try and feature them on the show.
Do you think we'll see a noodles frenzy today?
No.
Magnus, he won't get out the noodles. To recover from the football, he needs some energy.
Yeah.
But, you know, he keeps on, we keep telling him no on the show, that don't eat the noodles. We've noticed a correlation. Every time the noodles appears, about 5 minutes later, he gets a good position, and then he just lets his concentration slip, and a blunder occurs.
And you said it very nicely yesterday, Ivanka. Obviously, the body starts working when you're eating.
Right.
Energy goes to the digestive system. So it's the energy needs to be taken from somewhere. The brain, probably.
Yeah, it's often why you feel sleepy after eating a heavy meal. So, yeah, definitely, I would not advise I would not advise eating noodles or anything of the sort during a chess match. But I have to say, Magnus is a little bit special. He seems to be able to get away with it. We saw those statistics earlier on. He has the best statistics from anyone playing on the Championship Chess Tour. But then again, he hasn't won a tour event, so...
And, I mean, this is a special sort of a system, the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour, where they play 5 or 4 games every day, and they have 15 minutes break in between, where they can eat or relax, do whatever they want. For example, in a World Chess Championship match, David, what would the players be doing to sort of fuel up? Because they can be sitting there for like 7 hours, right?
Yeah, they can. OK, we have seen a rook trade, but during a over-the-board classical tournament, in the past, Magnus used to bring some orange juice, maybe a banana with him to snack on, so while his opponent's thinking, he would leave the board and have that banana. I think in the World Championship match, probably there will be a backstage room where the players can relax, and there will be some snacks, there will be maybe some chocolate, something very light, maybe some chocolate, some fruit.
So he won't have like a big meal during those maybe 7 hours?
No extra large pizzas.
No break for tea, like they do in cricket, or they used to do in cricket.
Really? They would have a break in the middle of the game and everyone would go for tea? Oh, that's so British.
But, yeah, I mean, for sure, I've seen at these big tournaments, whenever I've played in them, players, they do like to step away when their opponents are having those long 20-minute thinks. They do like to go back, maybe stretch their legs and have a little bit of chocolate. I think that won't distract the energy from the brain too much. It's enough fuel. And OK, meanwhile, there has been a development on the board. A set of rooks were exchanged on that corner line, and Magnus, having distracted the white rook away to the corner, decides to strike in the centre. And very logical stuff. Once your opponent's pieces go away to the side, fight in the middle of the board. And if we bring up the analysis board, we can see Magnus Carlsen with his last move, pushing in the centre, creating maximum tension. Look at all these pawns. It's like one gang here against a slightly smaller gang here. And I'm not sure which gang is going to triumph, which gang is more powerful. No matter what happens, the position is going to become open. For example, if white initiates all these trades, suddenly you can imagine a scenario where black's bishops become stronger because there are more open lines suddenly. Black's bishops will have a lot of power. White's not out of this game still, but I don't think Nakamura wants to see the position explode. Meanwhile, Magnus, he's insisting with this last move. I really like it for black. When you have the bishop pair, try and open things up if possible. It's very logical at the very least. White is solid though, and if white maybe just sits, maybe improves the white rook, bring it back towards the centre, or if you find the right way or the right order in which to trade in the centre, Nakamura should be okay. But Magnus trying to turn the screw, trying to amp up the pressure.
So Hikaru, will he be sort of looking at the position and thinking, if he's thinking about this pawns trading off, then he's like, okay, if I take, then he take, then I take, then he take, okay, and he's left with an extra bishop, sort of in a good position.
And the captures are beginning, Kaya, as you said. And it really is a case of he's thinking nothing more sophisticated than I take, he takes, and then what happens next. I mean, the key thing there is in the evaluation, because there comes a point where the captures stop, and you have to have that position in your mind, and you stop and you need to evaluate, and you have to go, okay, how am I doing? How are my knights working? Are they enough to counteract the power of the two bishops? What is my plan of attack? Or if you're in the defensive mode, then just ask, can you defend? Yeah, okay, but the trades keep happening. I mean, I have to say that I do feel that Hikaru hasn't played the middle game stage in the most aggressive manner, and I think that this has allowed Magnus to basically break open the center, and that is going to favor the two bishops. Okay, so Magnus, of course, he is trying to trade off knights, and he's trying to play against these two bishops are going to work better than bishop and knight. And yes, his pawn structure might not be anything to write home about. I do think that the two bishops ultimately will outweigh the bad pawns.
Yes, and that's what Magnus is hoping for long term, that his bishops will be the dominant factor in the position. So actually all of those pawns have been traded. I'm surprised Nakamura went so quickly for this, because he had 4 or 5 different permutations, different move orders to trade in the center, but he went very direct. Everything has clarified, and now jumping up with the rook. So White's rook eyeing up a pawn, also that pawn attacked by White's queen. That pawn attacked twice, only defended once by Black's queen. So there's a threat in the position. Magnus, he can, however, defend that pawn in several ways. He can drop back with the dark squared bishop to protect that pawn. He can just bring the black rook across 2 squares to protect that pawn. Short term, White is very active. So Magnus, he just wants to dull down his opponent's enthusiasm, dull down the initiative, those threats that White's creating. As soon as the game does take a slower turn, the black bishops will gain in power. So Black doesn't have the best pawns in the world, but he does have those bishops to look forward to. And okay, he does go passive with his rook. Again, not ideal, but hopefully for Magnus, it's just a temporary measure at least. And next he'll be thinking how he can maybe make use of those bishops.
Exactly, David. That's just what I was thinking. You know, first of all, White has the initiative. By initiative, I mean has the slight attack. Look at the pieces, they're active. And so, just as David said, Black is all about just holding off the White pieces for the time being. And then when he's done that, those two bishops will start to come alive. It does look to me, though, that White really is as safe as houses, though, because the pieces are so good, and there's basically a limited set of material on the board. So I kind of, almost for the time being, prefer White.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Almost.
I mean, I think it's just a matter of taste in this position. Both sides have something to be positive about, something to be happy about, and that's the beautiful thing about chess. Some positions here, for example, where the computer says it's almost just completely level. Here, some players like the short-term prospects of White's rook being active, of White having no real weaknesses. Some players, like me, would prefer the long term of having those two bishops. Those two bishops, probably Magnus won't be able to use them until move 40, 50, 60, but I always have one eye on the future. Right now, though, like you say, Jovanka, White doesn't have anything immediate to worry about. So it is quite pleasant for White just thinking how you can create another threat, how you can keep putting the pressure on Black. Black's rook is especially bad right now, and yeah, it's just a clash of styles, clash of tastes.
Definitely. And yeah, you can just see that Hikaru really is putting on the pressure on that pawn. And he's played a rather flashy move, because it does look, at first appearance, that maybe Black can capture the bishop. But tactics.
Tactics, let's bring up the board, because it looks like White is sacrificing a piece, but it's not a sacrifice. it is just an offer of trade. So this bishop has just landed on this square. Black can actually take it. So this pawn under pressure, it can take the bishop. The whole idea is white has suddenly unleashed an attack against the black queen, and it's not that simple. It doesn't end there. White can take the black queen, but suddenly white queen also under attack. Black's rook would jump down, taking the white queen, and at the very end, white would capture black's bishop in the middle of the board. And if we do a quick count, it's just been a trade. But the trade has been of queens and bishops, and black doesn't have the bishop pair any longer. He only has one dark squared bishop, and if bishops aren't as a pair anymore, black here will have no control over the light squares in future. White also has a very nice outpost for his knight in the center of the board. I think, if anyone, this will slightly favor white. But if it does favor white, the question is, what do you do as black, as Magnus Carlsen? This pawn is under attack in the current position. The only way to defend it is to step back with your bishop. This is very passive, though. This bishop tied down to this pawn, the rook tied down to this pawn, queen tied down to the pawn. Nakamura, he'll be looking for a way to maybe continue the pressure. That's the move I think Magnus will be looking for in the current position. This is the move I expect to see on the board.
Interesting. All right, I'm noticing one thing. So I'm sitting here and trying to understand this complicated game. All the squares where Hikaru could checkmate Magnus Carlsen or put Magnus in check, Magnus have covered those, but he's protecting all of those squares.
Yeah.
Is that an aim, sort of at this point in the game, to make sure all the squares where your king could be threatened are protected? And will it then be a aim for Hikaru to sort of lure those pieces away from those spots?
Well, if you look at the black king at the minute, you can actually see that it does have one defender, the bishop. You see the king is standing on exposed diagonals. Very often very easy to forget about diagonals. It's standing on exposed diagonal, but the black bishop is covering that. And let's take a look at white's pieces. So you can see the knight is there on the right-hand side, nowhere near the black king. And then you also see the issue with the white rook, also nowhere near the black king. So, actual fact, attacking the king isn't necessarily on Hikaru's radar because his pieces are just not coordinated enough for that.
Okay.
And you see, the king is
too early for that.
It's way too early for that. And also, the king is currently standing on a light square. White doesn't have any weapons to challenge that king on a light square. So instead, he's basically targeting his forces at the only piece that's standing on a black square, the black pawn. So he's piling up the pressure and he's just inviting some simplifications there. If he were to go for the attack, well, that would be in a situation where the black queen and the black bishop and the black rook were wandering away on another part of the board. They need to be far away. And the white rook also needs to have a clear line towards black king. And then there would be serious danger for the king.
Yeah. The white rook currently blocked off along this line, right? That's why if you can't checkmate, sometimes you have to go for smaller gains, like going for pawns. And white's trying to win this pawn, not just for the sake of winning a pawn, but also to clear this seventh line for the rook to later on try and attack the black king. So yeah, it's very much just building. I think an attack would be ideal long-term for white because black's king doesn't have as much pawn protection as white's does. But yeah, right now it's a bit of a long-term dream. A bit of a pipe dream for now. I have noticed, meanwhile, Magnus Carlsen does have a cool move. Okay, he didn't play it. He does. I was going to suggest this bishop takes pawn move, sacrificing that bishop because it has dropped off anyway. Actually, what has happened in the game is we did see all of those trades. So black's pawn did capture this bishop. The black queen dropped off. The white queen dropped off. And then the bishop was captured at the end. Magnus now dropping his bishop back, eyeing up this pawn, going for the white king even. And yeah, I think this should fizzle out to a draw after white's knight centralizes itself, defending this pawn, and the black bishop stepping forward. Yeah, this white knight is just almost immovable. This is on an outpost. It can't be attacked by pawns, can't be attacked by black's bishop. And likewise, black's bishop is nicely placed on an outpost. And I think these two pieces, the white knight and black bishop, they'll just cancel each other out. They'll balance each other out. And the draw looking the most likely result.
I do agree with you, David, but somehow I'd prefer black. I mean, I think if someone is going to have the easier time of it, it will be black. And the reason I'm saying that is because a rook and a bishop, they coordinate very well well together. Rook and a knight, not as well. And basically, I'm just thinking about those 2 pawns on the left side of the board. I'm thinking that the black rook can perhaps make itself a little bit more annoying and start attacking the pawns. And you can see Magnus has certainly gone for that idea. I mean, I'm expecting Hikaru just to slide the rook across to defend it, but the rook isn't necessarily well placed there, and
he slided himself to the left instead.
The hazards of playing with a wheelie, a chair with wheels.
Yeah. We still haven't seen a player fall off the chair.
Ooh, that would be a cool... Well, not for them, but that would be interesting to see.
Yes, if they don't hurt themselves, then, you know, that would be a little bit fun.
No chess players were harmed in the making of this show. And you might be right, actually, Ivanka. If white goes passive, if white plays moves like bringing the rook over to defend that pawn, I do start to fear for white's position.
But how else are you going to defend the pawn?
I think it might be time to start counter-attacking. White has the option of pushing one of his pawns, undermining black's central pawn.
Okay, he's done it. David, you called it out. Get active, don't get passive. And
we're about to... Okay, we might be about to see a draw. Magnus Carlsen repeating the position there, just giving a couple of checks to the white king. The white king, if it steps forward, black's rook will be able to step forward as well, taking a pawn with check. So the white king, most likely to step to the back row, to the bottom row, where it can avoid check and a pawn capture at the same time. So Nakamura shaking his head here. He knows that he had the time advantage on the board as well, a lot of life, but here he might have to allow a draw, and he will not be too happy with that one. So the reason Magnus is going for this, partly is because of the clock situation being low on the clock, partly as well, it is because of the central tension. Black's pawn in the middle attacked, but it has to stay where it is because it's defending the black bishop. So Magnus just a bit stuck for ideas, offering that repetition. Even if Magnus doesn't want the draw, it's a good psychological ploy to repeat the position, see what your opponent wants. And, okay, if Nakamura is feeling super aggressive here, really ambitious, then he might step forward with the white king, but that would be so risky. It would be like going all in poker, offering up all your chips, because black could simply win a pawn. So, yeah, big decision for Nakamura. Will he go for the draw? Will he allow the draw at least? Or will he burn his bridges?
Yeah, I would go for the draw, David. What about you? Take the risk?
If I'm playing Magnus, a draw's not too bad.
Yeah, Hikaru has decided to repeat the position. And now it is crunch time. If he steps back with the king, then the game will have... Well, the position will have repeated itself 3 times, and the game will be declared draw. And if Hikaru wants to roll the dice and amp up the risk value, the risk levels, then, of course, he has to move his king forward.
Look at his body language. He makes the move as he's about to turn away, and...
There it is.
More checks and a draw.
We do have a second draw in the final between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, a quicker one this time, but they are all tied in the match, the first match in the final. Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. And David, it was an interesting game, wasn't it? Can you quickly take us through the highlights?
Yeah, interesting game, and it did come down to this point. We were talking a lot about this position, and Magnus, if he wanted to win this game, if he thought now was his best chance, he would have kept the game alive. He would have kept all the pieces on the board, defended this pawn by dropping back his bishop. There's also a sneaky idea. He could maybe have sacrificed the other bishop. This bishop, it did drop off the board. It got eliminated later on, so he could have sacrificed it first, taken this pawn, and only then initiated the trades. But instead, we did see Magnus just happy to take all the risk out of the position, taking this bishop. And once the queens disappeared, once this bishop disappeared, we saw a scenario where these 2 pieces are just as equally strong as each other. Nicely centralized, and in the end, neither side could go for the win without taking any risks. This bishop, it did drop off the board. It got eliminated later on. Then initiated the trades, but instead we did see Magnus.
Coming up in 14 minutes, the third game in the final between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. It's going to be Magnus with the white pieces. But before that, we're going to show you the next Celebrity Charity Chess Challenge that we recorded 2 days ago. We know him best as the cool and kind Agent Rossi from Criminal Minds. He's also actually a voice in The Simpsons, the voice behind Fat Joe. But today, Joe Montana is here to challenge Magnus Carlsen at 10 years old in the Play Magnus app. And hi, Joe, welcome.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, we know you're a great actor, a great director. How are your chess skills?
Well, I think thank you for saying I'm a great actor and director, but I think we'll have to stop there. Fall short at the chess skills. But my brother kind of taught me the fundamentals of the game when I was young, and I played some then. But I think my level of play is probably somewhat similar to the character I played in the film Searching for Bobby Fischer, which is well, anyone who sees the film, it's somewhat self-explanatory.
Yeah, it must be one of your favorite movies, David.
Yeah, it was one of the first chess movies I ever watched as a kid, and I just loved the storyline. I loved, of course, the acting. What was the highlight of you, Joe, of filming and working on such a
I've been doing this a long time. I've been an actor professionally for 50 years now, and I have to say that particular project is very, very special to me for a lot of reasons. I think partly because the script was so good, and the level of talent, the other actors, to work with Ben Kingsley and Joan Allen, and even small roles. Tony Shalhoub played the one player in the one little scene with the boy, and so all of it, and just to be immersed in that world and know that it's a true story as well, and also to work with the great Bruce Pandolfini, who the character that Ben played in the film. Bruce was also our technical advisor on the film. And then also the young boy, who played the main character, he really wasn't, didn't come from an acting background. Where he came from was a chess background. He was considered one of the top 100 8-year-old chess players in New York at the time. And that's how he was cast, which I thought was fascinating. And probably lucky for me, because if it had turned out that he would have been a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, they might have chosen somebody else as the father. But we made a pretty good match, and so that worked out. So the whole adventure, the whole making of that film was very exciting for me. And Steve Zalian, who wrote and directed it, the next movie he wrote was Schindler's List. So obviously we were working with just in rarefied air with really talented people, and it was a wonderful, wonderful project, and I'm very happy I was able to be part of it. That's all very fascinating to me, and I love the idea that here's this game that has created this kind of bond among people. Well, in fact, we're talking now between Los Angeles and Norway.
Yeah.
The universality of this game.
I'm a big fan of Criminal Minds. I'm a huge fan of Criminal Minds. The 15 last season running on TVs all over the world right now. And the agents in Criminal Minds, I could kind of picture them, a few of them, as chess players. Do you agree, Joe?
Yes. In fact, there were a couple episodes. I think when Mandy Patinkin first did the show, he did the first 2 seasons. I entered in season 3 and replaced him. Mm-hmm. But they had established that his character and the character of Dr. Reed, played by Matthew Gubler, that they would occasionally play chess, because chess would be the kind of a game that, our characters, agents, who were trying to solve, the mystery of people who involved in these kind of horrendous kind of crimes against nature, it would be helpful to have an understanding of something like chess, and so force you to use your mind to think a little bit out of the box and come up with some conclusions.
And well, I also mentioned The Simpsons, playing Fat Tony in The Simpsons. Did you know world champion Magnus Carlsen also featured in The Simpsons, actually?
No, I didn't hear that, but that's good to hear. Yeah, that's my longest running character. I'm just going to be recording another one in the next few weeks. So I've been on that show for 30 years now. I first did my first Fat Tony in 1991, thinking it was just going to be one episode, and it'll be fun. But apparently they something they liked about that character, so I've been coming back ever since. So I think I have the longest run as a guest character on The Simpsons, which I'm, happy to do, and I enjoy doing it. And maybe we could work out an episode where Fat Tony plays a little chess. But knowing Fat Tony, I think he might get frustrated halfway through, and there might be some violence might happen. I don't know.
That's not unknown.
All right. Well, it seems chess sort of has crossed your, your acting throughout your career. So how are you sort of prepared now for the Magnus Carlsen challenge?
I'm prepared to be a very good loser. I think it takes a certain kind of stamina, a certain kind of class and character to be able to accept loss, to accept defeat. So not wanting to be a pessimist, and perhaps more of a realist. I enjoy the ability of, challenging myself, but I think I also am somewhat of a realist. And so I don't know how good an actor Magnus was. So I'd like to think that he has his field, I have mine.
Absolutely.
And from there, we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, David, you have to give us the rules for the Magnus Carlsen Celebrity Charity Chess Challenge.
That's right. So Joe will be taking on Magnus in the Play Magnus app. Magnus aged 10. I played him at age 10. He was very strong already. Joe will have 2 minutes on the clock. Obviously, the goal is to win, but if not, the goal is to last for as many moves as possible.
All right. Well, are you ready, Joe?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Fantastic. So here is the Magnus Carlsen Celebrity Charity Chess Challenge. Definitely some experience with chess for Joe Montagna. And whenever you're ready, just make your first move.
Got it. Oh,
there we go.
Oh, he's already moved. Okay. Here we go, and I'm going to move.
Okay, so Joe develops his queen very early on the offensive, on the attack. Magnus does play instantly, as we know. Okay, solid start from Joe. Developing a pawn, pushing another pawn, it looks like, in a moment. He's playing quickly. This is good. Trying to get as many moves as possible. Magnus, meanwhile, don't like that move, moving a rook.
That is very unconventional, David. I've never seen anything like that before. And Joe is doing some great stuff. He's developing his pieces. Now, will he get his knights out?
It looks like he's about to push a pawn. He's going to attack the opponent's bishop. That looks good to me. Kicking that bishop all the way back where it came from. Now, Joe needs to develop those pieces, as you mentioned, Ivanka. Get those pieces out, playing quickly. He's got 1 minute 10 left on his clock. He needs to maybe up the pace if he wants to break the existing record of number of moves played.
And Magnus, age 10, is being sneaky. He is challenging those pawns that Joe has pushed up the board. And you can see that Magnus is not caring about material. He just wants to develop his knight. And what are we going to see Joe do? He has to speed up. He has 50 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah, he's playing well. He's got a great position, but he does need to develop pieces and get more moves as quickly as possible, allowing now Black's knight into the center of the board. Maybe a bit of a slip there, but okay, he does have the opportunity to develop now. Okay, 35 seconds. Come on, Joe, let's get those moves on the board. Okay, looks like he's about to push another pawn.
And now we're under 30 seconds, and Joe has to play faster. He needs to start making moves. It's not the time to think. It's about playing as many moves as humanly possible.
20 seconds left. He needs to get those moves quick and fast now. Forget about their objective value. Just get those moves on the board. And okay, it looks like he's moving a rook. Good move there, but okay, 10 seconds, less than 10 seconds now for Joe.
5 seconds. Can he make another move?
One more move, Joe. Push a pawn, push a knight. He runs out of time.
And it's over. And if you press continue, Joe, we're going to see how many moves you lasted. 13 moves. 13 moves. All right.
That's good.
Yeah, 13 moves. That must be good. How do you feel about your game, Joe?
That's 10 moves more than I expected. So,
that's good. Bill Gates.
That is longer than
Bill. Good.
Yes.
Oh, good. Excellent.
And I must
13.
say,
I was born on the 13th.
I must say, at the end, you had a great position, actually.
Actually, that's the best position that any celebrity has ended with in the challenge so far.
Wow. Wow. Did you hear that, Joe? The best position any celebrity has been in.
Well, I have to, like I said, I wanted to move quickly. My feeling was to not try to overthink it and just kind of take the board in as an impulse. and just go with it. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy with 13, considering I haven't played a full game of chess probably since we did the movie, Bobby.
All right, well, let's take a look at the scoreboard, where this places you on the Celebrity Challenge. So we had, whoa, it's actually the same as Sal Khan. 13 moves. It is bottom of the table, though, but, well, a lot can happen here. How do you feel about the result, Joe?
I'm very, like I said, I'm very happy considering that I expected to lose a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But that's fine. And like I said, but I enjoyed it. I like the fact that it forces you to just kind of, you know, use your brain and that whole visual, mental, all the things that makes chess the game that it is, and why it's had the endurance it has, and why, it has the worldwide appeal that it does.
All right, well, Joe, this is obviously the Celebrity Charity Chess Challenge. The Play Magnus Group will donate $5,000 to a charity of your choice. And what charity is that?
It's an organization called ETTA, E-T-T-A. And it's just this wonderful, wonderful organization that is there to help special needs, young people. It's not limited to by a certain age, though. I have a daughter with autism. My 33-year-old daughter has autism. And especially during these pandemic times, it's been a real kind of handicap for her because she hasn't been able to do the usual kinds of going to, classes and museums and different things that would occupy her. And it's just turned out to be just this marvelous, marvelous organization where every day, Monday through Friday, my daughter gets on the computer because due to COVID restrictions, they're obviously still limited to kinds of things they can do in person. And from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, she's on there doing different things like they do exercise programs, they do games, they do singing, they do all kinds of things, virtual learning things. And it's just been a real blessing. So I'm very happy to be able to pass on your generous contribution to this group, ETTA. And because I can personally say they have been very instrumental in making my family's life, better, and the lives of other special needs individuals certainly out there.
That's heartwarming. Fantastic. Just love to hear that we have organizations like that making life easier for so many people. Joe,
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining our Celebrity Challenge, and good job.
No, my pleasure. I'm thrilled. Thank you so much. This was so wonderful, and it just brings me back to my experiences doing that film of searching for Bobby Fischer, which was nothing but good memories for me.
Again, Joe, thank you so much for joining us, and have a good evening.
My pleasure. Thank you all very much.
It was such an honor to have Joe Mantegna here 2 days ago for the Celebrity Challenge. I think Ivanka and David were a little starstruck. He did feature in the Searching for Bobby Fischer. Fantastic movie. All right, but we're heading back to the new In Chess Classic. Magnus Carlsen and Nakamura, they have played 2 draws so far, heading now into Game 3 in the first match. In the final, Shakhriyar Mamdiyarov and Levon Aronian, they won 1 game each so far in the battle for 3rd place, and they're right now playing their 3rd game. I'm just looking at the bar. It's looking equal right now, but anything can happen between these 2 guys. We'll follow that as well as we are heading into Game 3 between Magnus and Levon Aronian. It's going to be Magnus now with the white pieces. What do we expect, David, as we're waiting for him to join?
Yeah, it's difficult to know what to expect from Magnus Carlsen. Often in these matches, when you play the same opponent several times, you need other openings. You can't just rely on one line all the time. So Magnus, he's got 2 different strategies. He can play his opening from the first game, which actually worked quite well for him. Or he can assume that Nakamura will have found an antidote to that in the break, and Magnus can use a backup opening or a backup to the backup opening. He will have a lot of opening weapons in store. For this one, yeah. So let's see. Will Magnus repeat the same thing, or will he go for something a bit different this time?
A backup to the backup, and we are waiting for Magnus Carlsen to join us. So probably he is looking over some possibilities for openings here.
Yep, it's either that or eating some noodles.
Or eating some noodles.
But yeah, Magnus, while we wait for him to arrive, I think, personally, if it were me, I would repeat that same opening from the first game. It worked so well. Yeah. And Nakamura did seem surprised, but a lot of time early in the game.
But there is a trend, actually, because I remember in the first day when Hikaru Nakamura was playing against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov won very convincingly with the white pieces, and rather unusually, Hikaru went on the computer, blah, 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 found the antidote, and came well prepared and won the remaining of the games. So, I mean, I do think that Hikaru will have then checked his lines.
Yeah, it's tricky though, because in that type of opening that they had in the first game, finding a computer improvement doesn't necessarily solve your problems compared to the games that Nakamura did solve against Mamedyarov, where checking the computer in a sharp position where there was only one move at every turn. There, it is effective. In the type of position Magnus got earlier, computers aren't that helpful unless you really study with them for hours.
Hikaru's
just a small break this time.
Hikaru is laughing here. I wonder what that is about. Maybe something the arbiter is saying, because at this point, that will be the only people they're communicating with. Okay, but we have started.
Yeah, we have started, and Magnus, it's a backup opening. It's not the same opening he chose in the first game. This time opening with his king's pawn, last time with his queen's pawn. And now it's symmetry so far. King's pawn opening and the Italian game. This is what Magnus did against Levon Aronian. It was his main weapon in yesterday's semi-final. And Magnus, I have had a chat with him about this opening. I know it's one he's a big fan of. He thinks it is quite promising in terms of just getting a position, not necessarily walking into your opponent's homework, because on every turn you have 4 or 5 good moves. There's no way your opponent can predict everything in this opening. And this position, it's got bad memories for me. On the brink of becoming a world junior champion, world under-20 champion, I had this position with white. I only needed a draw, and it didn't work out. So, yeah, this position, it's developed a lot over the years. That was a long time ago. It's still been battled at the top level between many grandmasters. I haven't seen Nakamura use this one lately, though. Usually he goes for a different setup in this opening.
Yeah, but I have seen Magnus Carlsen play this against Wesley So in the Opera Euro Rapid. So, yeah, definitely things to do. But he has played a different move. You know, he's being very versatile. He wants to diversify the position on every opening. And you can see there, Hikaru there covering his eyes with his hands. And he's trying to remember the theory, because this is not the most popular move.
No, not the most popular move, but it is a trendy one. So white had 2 main options in that last position. The most natural, and the move I played all those years ago in the World Junior Championship, was to just move the white rook across one square, eye up black's pawn in the center of the board. Instead, Nakamura now has to worry about what to do after Magnus's last move. White pushing pawn on that left-hand side. That pawn is destined to gain even more space. And Nakamura, he still has to worry about what happens if white pushes another pawn on that flank, maybe attacking his bishop later on. Lots to consider here for Nakamura. But surely he studied this position before. And, OK, he looks off to the left. Every time he looks off to the left, it means he's trying to remember something. He's trying to recall something he's studied before. Now he's trying to keep us guessing by looking off to the right as well. But, yeah, for sure Nakamura has studied this. He's just trying to remember what he thought was the best move for black.
So Magnus having Hikaru think here after 8 moves, is that a successful opening then to Magnus?
It's a moral victory, isn't it? Yeah, you kind of feel some satisfaction that your opponent has had to think a little bit, and basically that Magnus's approach has been a big success.
And it's interesting that this opening, it's called the Italian game. When Nakamura faces the Italian game, 99 times out of 100, he plays something else. So he played something different this time because he tried to surprise Magnus. But Magnus said, no, I'm not surprised. I'm going to surprise you in return. So, yeah, psychological warfare.
Yeah, but the surprises keep on coming, David, because Hikaru actually responds with a not very popular move, actually. It is much more trendy to actually pick up the pawn that is on the edge of the board and either advance it 1 square or 2 squares, and just to either control the space or make room for the bishop. But, OK, instead, Hikaru goes, I like to pin. And we do like that expression, to pin is to win. But, OK.
Not this time, I think.
Not this time, definitely not.
look just below the player's cameras, the computer suggestions 3 moves for white give an advantage. Magnus plays one of them, kicking back that bishop to the edge of the board. The bishop didn't want to trade itself for the knight. That bishop wants to maintain a pin against white's knight, against the white queen. But if we bring up the analysis board, this move, this whole idea for black has a bit of a dodgy reputation as far as I know, having studied it myself. Black should, as Jovanka mentioned earlier, have pushed his own pawn on this side, because now white has the option of pushing his own pawn. And this doesn't look too scary for black, but not only does white gain space, he also takes away this square from these 2 black pieces. Those 2 black pieces actually need the square. Actually, the knight is the one that needs that square the most. And if you notice, for example, later on, white has the idea of bringing the queen forward, hitting this black knight, and this knight will never be able to use its ideal square. As far as I know, white getting a pawn to this square is a huge gain in this opening. Wow. It really paralyzes black's ideas. Black on that left-hand side now is a bit frozen, and if white, for example, steps forward, this bishop's going to have to retreat some really bad squares later on, and black's pieces are going to get all in a jumble.
And Magnus doesn't need asking twice. He's going to do that. One thing I've noticed with Magnus is Magnus loves to expand with his pawns on the left side of the board. He's constantly pushing those pawns forwards and just trying to get as much space as possible. So, I definitely think this whole opening choice has basically been a moral victory and perhaps even a positional victory for Magnus Carlsen. It is very difficult to face the world champion. And when it comes to our quiz of the day, that is what we're asking. We're asking, if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And you can tweet your answers using 3 hashtags this time. Hashtag #ChessChamps, hashtag Opera, and hashtag #NewInChess. And of course, everyone is coming up with their own rather novel approaches. We have Edmund Mukundi, who says if he were to challenge Magnus Carlsen, he would have to learn all the sacrifice positions and risk it all. I wouldn't want to play an endgame with him. No, sir, I agree with you. It is excellent, excellent idea. Spike Solid, on the other hand, says if I were to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, I will try to learn an opening, and after the theory, I will pray to not get checkmated very fast. I understand that one completely. When I play top grandmasters, I have this kind of mental thing in my head that I'm like, don't get checkmated in 20 moves. In less than 20 moves, once you pass it, you can relax and you can enjoy the game. But no one wants to lose in under 20 moves. So I understand Spike. And Barista du Femme du Mundo says that he would prepare, and this seems to be a very popular strategy on Twitter, I would prepare all the noodles I can eat in front of the world champion, playing the noodle gambit. And if you want to enter our competition, please tweet your answers using the hashtag #ChessChamps, hashtag Opera, and hashtag #NewInChess.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Nakamura having a bit of a think there, but he did retreat his knight from the center. So we did mention that knight a bit unstable. It was defended by the black queen, but it has retreated. And on the face of it, if you look at things, black looks like he's doing okay, but everything will start to fall apart because black's pawn in the center is a huge target. Also, black's bishop creating that pin, it will end up a bit offside. If we bring up the analysis board, because we do see some computer suggestions here, the top computer suggestion is actually to continue that strategy you mentioned, Jovanka, that Magnus loves. He's pushed his pawn forward, he pushed it again. Why not continue it? Step 3, push it once more. Push this pawn all the way to the end. You destabilize this pawn, and black doesn't really want to capture, giving himself ugly doubled pawns here, an isolated pawn here. If black instead just advances 1 square forward, suddenly this knight lacks protection. This knight has no one guarding it. You can attack it with your queen later on, or maybe more pertinently, you can attack it with your bishop. And as soon as this knight moves, the pawn in the center will be a huge target. This type of position is a nightmare. I've been there so many times on the black side. It's really hard to find safe squares for your pieces. I think if Magnus Carlsen plays this move, it's not the only one, but if he plays it, it's going to be difficult for Nakamura to start fighting back.
Nightmare, it's such a good word in chess. The knights there. I have to tell you guys something. We have another decided game in the battle for 3rd place. Levon Aronian winning the 3rd game, and that means all the games have been won by the player with the black pieces. So that's that's quite spectacular in chess, right?
So rare at the top level.
Yeah, totally rare. I mean, it's a little bit unsurprising. We did see Shakira Mamedyarov convincingly beat Hikaru Nakamura 3 times yesterday. We also saw him play very aggressive chess. We also saw a little bit of the same from Levon Aronian. It didn't quite work against Magnus Carlsen yesterday, but on day 1, we saw him try all sorts of tricky things. And, yep, it looks like it's being a very good night for Levon.
Well, it could be. So he is up by 1 point then in the battle for the 3rd place, the first match. Mamedyarov, he has to win that last game to tie the match. If it is a draw or Levon Aronian wins with the white pieces, not likely in this one, then he's going to be the winner of the first match. So definitely going to keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, and that whole match, I think that 3rd place playoff between these 2 entertaining players, it's just an advert for chess. Just all the decisive games. I've taken a quick peek, so much chaos on the board. Both players all out, taking risks, not scared of losing, and yeah, fireworks.
And I actually talked quickly to Simon Williams, Ginger GM, joining us after this game, and he told me he wanted to show us a move that was played by one of these players in one of the games. So we're actually going to we're going to get a little bit of insight in what has been going on in the battle for 3rd place. All right, but we do have a few moves here.
We do have a few moves, and note how Magnus, he didn't take that opportunity to continue pushing his corner pawn, continue getting more space, lengthening the scope of the white rook in the corner there. Nakamura did take the time to block the advance of that pawn. That's well worth 1 move. You always want to block your opponent's pawn pushes, your opponent's most annoying ideas. And Nakamura, now that he's played that move, he will be feeling much, much safer. And Magnus, with his last move, jumping into the center with his knight, he's basically just trying to remove all the risk from the position, and he's actually saying to Nakamura, you can trade my knight, you can make the pawn structure symmetrical, but he's hoping that his pieces will be better placed. And Nakamura, with his head in his hands, just as he's about to make a move, let's bring up the board, let's show what he's thinking about, because white has just jumped in with his knight. If this knight is captured, which it probably will be, because white is maybe threatening a pin along this diagonal, if the knight is captured, after knight takes knight, pawn takes, it looks like these pawns now very balanced, blocking each other. But the key thing, the key reason white has the advantage here, and we're going to see it, the key reason white has the advantage is because this knight is badly placed. Nakamura now moving his king, that's an aggressive move. I was going to say the knight is badly placed because it's got nowhere to jump, forward at least. It has to jump back later on. It's completely dominated by this pawn. This pawn controls all of the entry squares into white's half for that knight. And Nakamura, his last move, shifting the king to the side, again, looks very innocent, but the reason the king has shifted is because now it is off this diagonal, and that means that the pawn is freed up. No matter what white does, I think Nakamura, he's tempted, well, he will be tempted to push this pawn forward and really explode open the center, explode open the position towards the white knight that is pinned along this diagonal.
No, I love that line that you pointed out, David. You know, a bad knight with no prospects. And yeah, when you have that kind of situation, well, you do have to mix it up. You have to create chaos on the board. I mean, I personally think that that's a great strategy from Hikaru, because he is in danger of getting positionally overwhelmed, especially on the left side of the board. Just look at those pawns. They're amazing. And, okay, and Magnus says, no, you want to push a pawn forward? Ain't going to allow that one. And he steps forward with the queen. And if you notice, what a lovely dual-purpose move that is. Because, you know, first of all, it gets out of the pin. Great job there. And secondly, it actually prevents black from advancing his pawn 2 squares forward. He was dying to open up those lines, and now that is no longer in the equation. So, good idea.
Yep, the queen protects the white pawn once that is captured, so that just completely destroys black's hopes of playing that move. Very nice by Magnus, but Nakamura, he changes plans. He moves his queen, planning to line up the black rook with white's queen.
Yeah. And the wait-and-see game kind of continues. I mean, I do quite like this game where one side has this strategical overwhelm. By strategical, I just mean not just great pawn structure, great pieces, and everything is just primed for dominance. And Hikaru has to fight against this. And he has to fight against this by creating some random ideas. He has to confuse Magnus. He has to wait for the action to strike so that he can respond. So, like David says, Hikaru is just intending to centralize one of his rooks, just line it up against the queen, and wait and see what Magnus does, because there's still a lot of dynamic possibilities in the air.
Yep, still a lot of dynamic possibilities, and if it does come down to a situation where Black has to burn his bridges and has to just go all out, then Nakamura will do that. But I've noticed recently, in the last few years, Nakamura, his style has become maybe more mature, maybe, again, geared towards those long games. Nakamura wins a lot of his games by waiting for the opponent to go wrong. So Nakamura, as long as he can, he'll try to just slowly improve his pieces, keep the tension, slowly maybe start chipping away at White's strategic edge, White's superior pawn structure on that left side, maybe just improving those black pieces on the way. But, yeah, either Magnus will continue building and Nakamura will have to go all out on the attack, or Nakamura will slowly manage to consolidate. Actually, this reminds me of his Armageddon game against Mamedyarov yesterday. Very similar pawn structure, and Nakamura there, he did solve Black's problems very naturally, not taking too many risks, just playing very easy, simple moves. So, okay, Magnus just shifting his rook to the side there. Notice how that rook is on the same line as Black's queen, so if the position opens up, White will likely gain some time there against the Black queen. I expect to see Nakamura do the same, line up one of the black rooks with the white queen in the middle of the board.
Yeah,
okay,
and
he doesn't.
He doesn't do that. Instead, he moves his knight backwards. I mean, okay.
We did say that knight was bad, right, Ivanka?
Yeah, we did say it had no prospects, it was not doing a good job, and it had no hope. Okay, so it's trying to maneuver itself into fresher pastures, but okay, I was expecting the rook to move, but now that I've seen this knight retreat,
you like it?
I like it. I like it because it's headed to, the knight is headed into the center, and from where it can actually eye up a square that is actually very, very aggressive. It's like the hallmarks for an attack. Yep.
So, for example, if White just moves a piece, Black's knight will jump in, and the hallmarks of attack, you want to use this square, right?
Yes.
So the knight, if it jumps to that square, it would attack the white queen, and it would edge towards the white king as well. With that in mind, maybe I want to cover that square, and Ivanka, the move that I would be very tempted to play here, dual-purpose move, is one, to push this pawn forward. So your knight will never use this square as black, so even if you jump forward now, you can never use this square. My ulterior motive, my secondary idea for White using this pawn, apart from covering the square, is to use the protection for this square, the knight jumping to the side. And Magnus plays it, and White's knight now is going to try and do the same as the black knight was trying to do, and jump into the square to harass the black queen. And we mentioned a few days ago, knight on f5 will thrive. If the knight gets there, White's in control. Really nice move by Magnus. I like it myself, but it's typical for this type of pawn structure. White pushing forward, preparing this idea.
Like, that is just an evil genius type of move, David. I mean, it's just fantastic. I started laughing because I was thinking, that is such a David kind of move, because, you know, first of all, when the knight does go to the square, just look how many squares it can go to. Oh, look, it can't go to any squares because it's been dominated by a pawn. And this, I've noticed, is something that I've noticed you love to do. And then when you kind of said, the knight will go to the edge and then go to f5, where it will thrive. It's like, ooh.
But will then Hikaru's plan now be to stop that plan? Will he try to protect that f5 square?
He will do at some point, quite likely, but it's not so easy, because if Black's pawn ever drops down to protect that f5 square, the black bishop on the edge of the board loses all of its retreat squares. So, yeah, you mentioned, Ivanka, that it's a very David Howell type of move, but that's why they call me a poor man's Magnus Carlsen, right? Because Magnus, he also finds it, and it looks powerful. It looks like a good one.
I've never heard that, David, actually.
I've heard that many times.
I've never, ever heard that at all. So, yeah.
A budget version.
Well, even that is a fantastic chess player, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm desperately trying to think of something that, well, Hikaru can do to meet this dangerous idea. I mean, it's not necessarily that dangerous, but it just looks scary and it just looks overwhelming. I mean,
it's not even on its own. I mean, the knight on f5 on its own won't do too much, but it's just once it gets there, the rest of White's pieces will start jumping forward. Okay, Magnus looking away there, slightly distracted, but he goes for it. We're heading straight to that position that we showed on the board a few moments ago. Black's rook now finally lines itself up with the white queen. So will we see Magnus jump in with that white knight? We do. Attacking the black queen. It's found that perfect f5 square. Is it going to thrive? The knight. Nakamura, he reacted quite quickly to this very scary plan. I personally would have taken a bit more time as black just to try and find a way to cut across my opponent's plan. If you see your opponent's plan coming, you have to find a way to counter it, and Nakamura, he allowed it to happen. Right now, I think all Magnus needs to do is move the white queen, not sure where, but move it out of the eye line of the black rook, and Nakamura's in trouble. The black knight, as you mentioned, controlled by those two pawns we highlighted a few moments ago. The white knight, glorious. If you ever attack the white knight with a pawn, your bishop on the corner gets trapped.
Yeah, and it's not just the black knight that is dominated. The black bishop as well, there's got no future. I mean, okay, right now there's a threat. Right now the bishop is threatening to move away, and there will be an uncovered attack on the queen by the black rook. But okay, that is a very simple threat, and as David says, all that Magnus needs to do is to move the queen away. There's not a chance that Magnus won't see this. Okay. Where would the queen move to? Let's be a little bit concrete about the whole thing. Would you step to the center to kind of like keep the queen on like the Goldilocks kind of row? Because that kind of row is very Goldilocks, and it's Goldilocks because, you know, obviously she likes things not too hot, not too cold. She likes it perfect, and the queen in the center on a square on the third row is very flexible because she can go to the right, she can go to the left, she can go forward, she can go backwards, and she has a lot of power. Just look at her like this. So, yeah, I would be tempted to step.
Slide to the right.
Slide to the right. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a very natural move. The only thing that maybe is making Magnus Carlsen hesitate is that he might want to use that square for his bishop.
Right.
But
that makes me hesitate as well. But, you know...
Maybe there's just no better square, though. You don't really want to retreat the queen all the way next to the white king. You don't really want them to retreat the queen to the left side because, actually, she's probably needed in the centre and needed near the white king. So, yeah, I agree. I like your move, Jovanka, but Magnus looking for options.
Yeah.
He has a choice, but either way, it has to be a queen move here for Carlsen.
That would just be astounding if he didn't do a queen move.
You mentioned, Jovanka, that... Oh,
wow, okay. I'm going to eat my words. Something else happened on the board. I mean, he picked up his pawn and he attacked the bishop. That wasn't actually something that occurred to me. I was thinking of very directly, like queen is indirectly attacked, queen must move. And I didn't have the flexibility to understand that actually you can get away with pushing your pawn, attacking the bishop. And the big point is that if black has an effective move with the black bishop, the one that's lined, the dark square bishop, then, well, you can't really move it to an effective square because the queen will just slide away all the way to the right.
Magnus looks distracted. He's been looking off to the right there several times over the last couple of minutes, and he played such a committal move while being distracted. Look again, he's looking... yeah, he's not looking at the board too much.
Well, we know he's got some big windows right in front of him, right? Yeah. Looking out to the street, so maybe something's going on outside on the streets there.
Yeah, and yeah, you can see the harbour. And okay, meanwhile, just below the players' cameras, we did see the stockfish, the computer suggestions. Black found the best move, the most natural move as well, not taking the time to uncover an attack against the white queen, instead saving his bishop in the corner of the board. And we wait to see Magnus Carlsen's idea. I did not like that pawn push from him on the last move because you burn some bridges. Pawns don't move backwards. There are now some weak squares that have been left behind. And the whole reason Magnus Carlsen did that is to just kind of create a square, a safe square for his queen. Magnus there shaking his head. He has created a safe square for his queen. That square wasn't possible to use because black bishop was controlling it previously, but it feels like a small gain for a big loss there. You lose a lot of control of squares, but you do gain a slightly better posting for your queen. Yeah, so Magnus, it looks like a very committal idea when he had other safer, more kind of consistent options. Yeah, it just feels so unnatural. That pawn, it pushed itself one square forward a few moves ago, then it pushed itself again. If he was going to do that, maybe he should have done it earlier. And,
so what do you guys think right now, this game? A draw, a win for white, a win for black?
All three results still possible. If you asked me 2 moves ago, Kaya, I would have said a win for white.
Okay.
But Magnus, with that last decision, taking risks, the white king, it looks safe for now, but it's a bit airy, just a few holes around it. And what do you think, Ivanka? I'm trying not to commit and to give my answer here.
Yeah, I'm going to commit. And like I said, I quite like Magnus's position. I mean, I have a different disease than David. I like to push pawns. I like to advance as far as I can go. And I'm quite encouraged by this pawn thing, this pawn advance, mainly because, well, if you just kind of look at Black's position, I agree. It is a very committal pawn advance that Magnus has done. At the same time, Black has got no activity. You know, he's not doing anything. Every single way he turns, there's something wrong with his position. There's no space. And I do envisage that Magnus should be able to do something here, just play a few natural moves and keep asking the question to Hikaru, what you gonna do? Because it's not that easy.
Yeah, when you said what you gonna do, I'm thinking bad boys, bad boys.
When they come for you, yeah.
But one thing that, okay, Hikaru making faces, he's not happy with his position. He just pushes a pawn, stopping any potential advance of White's pawns. I was going to say one thing you could do as Black, but you probably don't want to do, is to eliminate White's strong knight. You could play bishop takes knight, but White will capture with his central pawn, attacking Black's knight and opening up a line for the White queen. So that's why Nakamura, he's trying to delay that decision as long as possible. White's knight is strong, but you don't want to remove it yet. You want to wait until the right moment. And right now, there we see, again, move suggestions. Very natural. White can just develop a bishop, move a king. Both of those high up on the radar for the computer, and Magnus, he just moves his king. The reason he did that is because his queen was undefended. And in chess, especially in rapid chess, when you don't have much time on the clock, just keep everything protected. Loose pieces drop off. You can't allow any tactics against undefended pieces.
Totally agree with you, David. It's a multi-purpose move, but it also, that king move is really, really sly. And the reason I'm saying it's sly is because suddenly the white rook now has the possibility to slide all the way to the right. Now, why do you think I want to slide the rook all the way to the right? Because that is the making of a potential attack. And, OK, well, we've seen some big changes in the position because Hikaru jumped in with the knight. That knight has now been quickly removed by Magnus. And now we have a completely different situation on the board where Magnus has no control over the dark squares, but an overwhelming position. And that is why he's actually traded his knight for the dark square bishop. And Hikaru made a very, very quick choice because primarily he was forced to. He had to capture back with the pawn. And look at Magnus. He just plonks his bishop into the center. And that is one bad piece. I mean, bad. I was going to say bad boy there. Thanks to you, David.
Sorry. Yeah, that is one devilishly strong piece. White's bishop in the center of the board, dominating everything, eyeing up Black's pawns on the left. If you compare it to Black's bishop is completely hemmed in. It's hitting against concrete. White's pawn in the center is rock solid, and it will be probably for the rest of the game. So right now, White has a better pawn structure. Black has doubled pawns on that F line that we mentioned, the same line as the queens. Black has an isolated pawn in front of the white bishop, and Black's bishop is so much worse than its counterpart.
And I'm just noticing quite a few tweets that are popping up here, because we're wondering why Magnus is looking off to the side all the time, like he's doing right now. And actually, there is a Real Madrid game going on right now, so we do have quite a few viewers thinking it's probably a football game he's watching.
Yeah, he would have had to have asked for special permission, I guess, to watch that one alongside his chess game. But I wouldn't put it past him. Big football fan.
Well, but is it taking his focus away, or is it still going good?
I mean, I would never dream of watching football while I'm playing an important chess game with so much money on the line, so much pride at stake. But Magnus is Magnus. He does like to play. Well, he plays his best chess when he's relaxed, simply. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll find out. I thought it might be some of our viewers tweeting, you know, we're talking about what you would do if you were facing Magnus Carlsen. I thought it might be some of them just outside his window trying to distract him, test his concentration.
And on that subject, David, we do actually have some really cool tweets. Again, for our quiz of the day, we are asking, if you had to play Magnus in a match, how would you prepare? And you can tweet your answers using 3 hashtags, hashtag #ChessChamps, hashtag Opera, hashtag #NewtonChess. And Tamara Jankowska says that she thinks that preparing for that match is just wasting time. As a normal human being, she won't win. So she would would just be glad to meet Magnus and will try to make him laugh. And that's a nice, I approve of that one. We saw David was very successful in making Magnus laugh. And Carl Portman says that men can multitask, snooker, football and chess, the holy trinity. And Valon Berisha says that he would actually prepare the Bomb Cloud variation. Knowing Magnus and being a huge fan, I know he would go Bomb Cloud against me as a weaker player who hopes to have all my pieces on the board already by the first 10 moves. Yes? But we actually saw... Oh, wow! Hang on a second. Back to the game, David, because something has happened.
Yeah, we saw Nakamura as well, surprised by that last move, and he's trying to work out whether Magnus has just come up with genius or whether he's come up with a blunder. Magnus sacrificing a bishop. He's just played bishop takes pawn. That bishop can be captured. And look at it. Stockfish says Black can get away with recapturing that bishop. Black will suddenly go up a bishop for a pawn. Magnus has a sneaky idea in mind, but does it work? That is the big question, and I think we're going to have to bring up the board to show this. Maybe we can keep an eye on the players, because there will be some big reactions. White has just captured a pawn on this square, but the bishop could be taken for free. Take that bishop. Hikaru, he needs to, otherwise he's just losing on the board. He needs to go into this variation. White's whole idea is to step forward with a pawn, a double attack against White, against the Black Queen, and opening up a surprise against the Black Rook. And in this position, Black needs to decide, how do you save those two pieces? I don't think you can save them both at the same time, unless you play this move. Drop the queen back, protecting the rook, saving the queen, and Magnus, he's weighed up this position. We're going to get there. White now, look at how many pawns he has on that left side of the board. He has these 4 against Black's 1. So White now is dominating in terms of pawns, but he has a bishop less, and maybe Nakamura can save the game by bringing his queen across, because now, maybe the move Magnus missed, after rook takes rook, queen takes, White cannot take this rook anymore, because suddenly at the very end of this long variation, there's a nasty check. And suddenly, attacking the White King, attacking the White Queen, Black would win. This bishop, the Black bishop, protected by Black's Queen. Yeah, this one is so complicated right now. Has Magnus missed something, or is he still got things under control in the current game position? He can't win a rook, and if he can't win a rook, will his pawns be better? Will White's pawns be better, or will the Black bishop simply block them later on?
Exactly. Well, this is incredibly dangerous. I mean, but those, I have to admit, in all fairness, those pawns are pretty scary. I mean, they're not easy to kind of calculate, but just look at that. Like, one of them is two squares away from queening. That is going to strike terror in the heart of Hikaru. Now, Hikaru really has to go into ultra-focus mode, because, yes, Magnus can't go rook takes rook because of the line that David just showed, but, I mean, there's plenty other options, right? Or is there nothing to do?
What's happening to Magnus? He's not focused at all on the game, and he's just played one of the most committal decisions, sacrificing a piece. Knowing Naka's body language, Naka thinks he's winning. I've seen this face before so many times. Naka is currently focused on the position. He's thinking, have I missed something, or am I just winning as Black? Nakamura thinks having that extra bishop is going to be better than having the white pawns. Occasionally you see Naka frown, and yeah, right now Magnus needs something quick on the board and the clock, because if he doesn't justify his piece sacrifice, I don't think those pawns are enough. They look scary, they look strong, but...
Well, I would immediately go for... No, I would not do that. I would have pushed the pawn actually up the board, and, OK, well, Magnus took a different decision. He traded off rooks, and I was not so a big fan of that move. And after there, he plays his rook to the center, now nicely covering the dangerous bishop move and getting ready to advance the pawns.
Yeah, so Magnus, he had to kill his opponent's main idea. Black's main idea, as we saw a bit earlier, was to bring the Black bishop to the center of the board. That has been prevented. Black's rook now is under attack. White's queen threatening to take it. Naka, he has to deal with that threat. So, OK, he blocks the white pawn with his rook. It's time now, Jovanka. Your move.
Yes.
Start pushing those white pawns.
Yes,
Otherwise it's too late.
Exactly, and I have to say, I do quite like chess grandmaster Yasser Sarawan's expression for pawn pushing. Push him, baby. And, OK, instead, Magnus has decided to capture the pawn.
So, OK, taking one of Black's pawns. It's now 3 pawns for a piece.
Yeah, but I do feel that this is an issue of timing, and that it's very important to get that extra thing going. And yes, I know it's an extra pawn, but it would have been way more scary to start advancing those pawns. Okay, now Hikaru has moved with the queen, and then the big issue is, what is white going to do now?
I really don't like that move by Nakamura. Queens are always best towards the center of the board. That's a very passive move. The whole reason Nakamura is doing that is because he thinks his queen on that side of the board will stop the advance of white's pawns. But, okay, there we see the computer suggestion for white is to just centralize the white queen. Meanwhile, Magnus, he doesn't go for that. He steps forward with the white king instead. That is quite a logical strategy. He's putting everything on dark squares. Look at all of white's pawns, actually, especially on the left and in the center. Look at all of white's pieces. They're on dark squares, not the same color as black's bishop. So, yeah, right now, Magnus trying to push pawns. He's putting nearly everything now on dark squares. Only one white pawn remains on a light square. This is quite aesthetic stuff by the world champion, at least.
I mean, I have to admit with you, I really admire that king step up, because yeah, it's not something that would have been on my radar, actually. I would have been so focused on harmonizing the position just to promote those pawns that I didn't think about taking a time off. So, yeah, great stuff from Magnus Carlsen. And you can see him advancing there. Is he just trying to gain space, or is this perhaps the markings of a dangerous attack on the right side?
I think white, well, I think it's just too risky to continue advancing. I would never even advance the pawn in front of white's king, at least. I would maybe advance the corner pawn. You mentioned earlier, Magnus loves to advance his corner pawns to gain space, to take squares away from the opponent. But the pawn in front of white's king, I think that would be a step too far.
Right.
So, yeah, a bit of a waiting game. Magnus had his head in his hands for a moment. Maybe he's realizing he's not fully focused. Nakamura, meanwhile, I said maybe he thought he was winning. He's starting to realize it's not so easy for black. Black is maybe on the defensive for now, at least, but if he can maybe relocate that black bishop or improve the black queen, I still think black has decent chances. I don't fully agree with the evaluation bar, which it says 0.0. I think either this is very good for white or it's going to be very bad, especially if white can't push his pawns on that left side.
It's actually not very easy for Hikaru to come up with a plan. I mean, I'm looking at some natural moves, like you're saying, relocating the queen, just trying to snake the way in towards the right side. But okay, Hikaru actually just centralizes, well, he moves his king one step closer to the center.
Yeah, that king move, it might look mysterious, but I guess the plan is ideally long-term to trade the queens, and then black's king is closer to running across and stopping white's pawns. And yeah, it's back to Magnus. How does he improve? He'd love to push pawns on that left side, but it's not possible yet without dropping a pawn because of the placement of the black queen.
So is it time now to drop the queen?
The white queen back?
Yeah, drop the white queen back, and well, then we start pushing.
Yeah, that would make sense. Magnus has a sneaky way by retreating his queen to maybe support the advance of those pawns, but it's not easy. This is not the type of position that you want to play with only, well, less than 2 minutes on your clock. And Magnus retreating with his king, that's back where the king came from. Is that kind of a silent admission of defeat, admission that he has no plan, that he's not doing anything, he doesn't know what to do next?
Yeah, I think that's the case. And I think it's a dangerous waste of time, actually, to move his king forward and move his king to the side backwards and then advance some pawns on the right. I think he needed to get on with his goal of pushing those pawns on the left. Because once the bishop is allowed to blockade, well, Hikaru's position becomes a lot easier. And yeah,
that bishop has improved itself, stopping a potential advance of white's pawns on that left side. And yeah, it feels like black is slowly improving his position. Magnus seems to be at a loss of what to do next. And he had such a glorious position, and taking this huge risk, it's yet to be seen whether that backfires. And okay, Magnus has no idea what to do, so he's just retreated his king and stepped it back to where it came from. He's just playing the waiting game, sitting and hoping that Naka can't improve his position as well.
Little time left for Magnus on the clock as well. Definitely more time for Hikaru. And I have seen several times Magnus's eyes shifting to the side. We're wondering if it's watching a football game here. And he's probably going to regret that if he looks over this game and sort of sees what you guys have been seeing, that he really did have some big chances.
Yeah, he was fully in control, and it was only as soon as he started looking off to the side that things started unraveling, and now it's anyone's game, and we do see the computer, the bar is starting to edge over towards black's side because white has wasted so much time now with his king.
And Hikaru just improving his bishop one square at a time, and I think this is just what black needs to do, you know, just continue reinforcing his position, just guarding against the advance of the pawns on the left. And okay, well, David, well, here comes a kind of clash of strategies. You kind of said definitely never, ever advance the pawns in front of the king. And Magnus has said, I'm going to go for it.
Magnus really taking huge risks. He didn't necessarily need to do too much. He could have continued his strategy. He's being inconsistent. He moved up and down with the king, losing a few moves, and then he struck and moved a pawn forward. The white king now looking mightily exposed. There are no attackers around it yet, but the white king will never have any pawns. I was going to say pawn shelter, but then that pawn, I guess, steps forward to maybe protect the white king. I'm surprised Magnus did this. He actually gave up a pawn in that little transition, but it was to secure a central square for the white queen. What do you think, Ivanka? Is this just the world champion losing the thread? Or has he found a setup where black can't break through, black can't improve his position?
I mean, I still think black's position is actually practically and psychologically a little bit tricky. I mean, it's just the kind of whole idea that if you're a little bit too careless, then white's pawns will advance. And once they start advancing, I think it will almost be game over for black. But at the same time, I feel between this position and the position a few moves earlier, I think it's only Hikaru who's improved.
And Hikaru slightly shaking his head. That's probably because he wanted to maintain his time advantage. Hikaru loves to have an extra couple of minutes on the clock, just as a bit of leeway when things get really nervy and really sharp. But, okay, Hikaru did spend a minute there and then just brought the black king across. Black's play at least has been consistent. He's improved the black bishop. He's brought his king across using the bishop as shelter. Whether they're good or not, I'm not sure, but Nakamura at least sticking consistently to one plan. Magnus is the one who's been kind of going really direct, then taking a break with a slower move, going direct again, then taking a break. It feels like the world champion now, he needs to show us what he's got in mind.
Yeah, and he has 1 minute on the clock to show us, David. And when the clock gets down below 1 minute, well, then panic starts to basically rear its ugly head. And, okay, Magnus also moving his king. I mean, there seems to be... what can Hikaru do to make that step-by-step improvement?
I don't really see it yet. Hikaru doesn't see it yet, how to improve his pieces. But the one thing we should mention is Magnus would love a draw right now. Just the way he's been playing, moving the king around, he doesn't really know what to do. He's asking Hikaru to repeat the position. And actually, okay, I said I'm not sure what black should do because there's a lot of ways you can maneuver. The computer thinks that black's best is to just shift the black queen across one square to the right, eyeing up one of white's pawns, and that would actually cause some questions, at least, for Magnus Carlsen to answer. Still not decisive, still not winning for black, but at least it would have posed a difficult problem for the world champion, a problem which he would have to face with less than a minute on his clock. Meanwhile, Nakamura bringing the black king back to where it came from. Maybe Nakamura as well isn't sure what he can do, and Nakamura, if he continues moving the black king up and down, the white king dancing up and down, will go to a draw. That face.
The struggle is real, you know?
That was so sudden. He was just suddenly up in the camera.
We've seen so many faces from him, but never that one, right?
I love Hikaru Nakamura. He's just the perfect online player because he gives us these faces. Fantastic.
Yeah. And it looks like he's calculating something. You know, the head has gone up and the eyes are kind of looking like they're... Oh. What is he calculating?
Well,
Is there anything to calculate in the position? It's just about grouping the pieces together in a constructive way. I liked your idea, David. I think you have to be a little bit sly in how you approach that idea, because you need to do it when the white king has gone off on a little bit of an adventure. Okay, so he's repeated the move with his king. And now will Magnus repeat his idea?
So this is the second time we've seen this exact position. If they continue to move around with the kings, which is looking quite likely, then we would have a draw. It would be a threefold repetition, same position 3 times. The game is declared a draw. But, okay, Magnus is the one thinking now, despite the fact he's down to 20 seconds, he's debating whether he can continue playing. And Magnus Carlsen plays for the win. He doesn't go for the draw, which Nakamura quite likely would have taken. And Magnus grabbing a pawn, but allowing the pride and joy of his position, the white pawn in the center, to be taken off the board, to be snapped off. And White has created a pin. White's a piece down. For only 2 pawns, a bishop for 2 pawns, that's bad for White, but he has created a pin. Black's rook cannot move because the king would be under fire from the white queen. So can either side improve? Is there any way to put pressure on that black rook? Is there any way for Black to break that pin over the next few moves?
Well, Magnus has given a check with the queen to the center, and all the while the clock is ticking down. Magnus Carlsen steps aside with his king, and he has 36 seconds left on the clock. And look at Hikaru's king. It is out there in the middle of the board. That has to be terrifying.
Scary times now for Nakamura. So that must be why he made this face, because he saw what was coming. And now the black king in danger. The black rook, no, it's still pinned. If Black plays rook takes rook right now, Black's queen would be under fire suddenly from the white queen in the center of the board. So Black's rook is frozen. It can't move. Black maybe needs to first improve his queen. He could also maybe move his bishop. Lots of choice now for Hikaru Nakamura, but he has to be careful. Also, pawns have started disappearing. If all of Black's pawns disappear, White is out of danger. So Magnus, being very sneaky and very practical, he's removed a bit of risk, and he's still setting traps for Nakamura. And look at the clock times. Both sides now down to under 40 seconds. It's all about the nerves.
Yeah, definitely. And David, that is actually a very natural move. That is actually a big mistake. It's a big blunder in the position. And Hikaru has made the big blunder. This is a huge, huge blunder. And the reason is because Magnus can sidestep with the queen 1 square and give a check. And Magnus has done it.
The only winning move as well.
Yeah.
And Nakamura, he's put his queen on a bad square. That was the move I thought was most natural as well. But he has fallen into a trap. Now, Nakamura, wherever he puts the king, White will simply play...
Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook check. And now the big problem is that after rook takes rook, Hikaru cannot capture the rook with the queen, and he cannot capture the rook. Magnus doesn't see it. Okay, maybe he's just repeating. Okay. Ooh.
He'll repeat once, and then he'll try for the win.
Is he just playing with his food now?
Yeah, well, what is happening, David?
Yeah, so Magnus, he will play rook takes rook. There we go, the rooks have disappeared. He repeated that to gain 20 seconds on his clock, gaining 10 seconds after every move. White is 2 pawns up and completely winning. All he has to do is avoid the checks. And I think Black's checks are going to run out. Nakamura, look at it, he realizes he thought he could make a draw by continuously checking the white king. But White's king will actually just hide at the side there. Okay, Black didn't have enough checks, so he starts grabbing pawns. White's just a pawn up. Queen endgames. We saw Nakamura lose one yesterday to Mamedyarov. This one should also be lost. But still some hard work to be done. So Magnus Carlsen finding that great, well, setting a trap, finding that great continuation, playing for the win, still has to finish this one off.
So Hikaru's going to be annoyed now. He missed this.
Yeah, he missed it, and now he just has to beg for a draw. There's 2 results possible, white win or a draw. Most likely going to be a white win, and that's psychologically so difficult when you've got less than a minute.
Oh, yeah. And it's also psychologically difficult because, as David says, you know, Hikaru was doing okay. He had just kind of turned the tables. He was doing some good defense, and then suddenly a big blunder, and it's all gone downhill. And, okay, the win still needs to be found. Magnus still needs to play good moves because there is a high chance of there being a perpetual check. So, but okay, Hikaru now with 20 seconds left on the clock, and it's ticking down. He needs to find a safe space to put his king, and he moves 1 step down. And now the dream for Magnus is if he were to be able to do a check, which actually swaps off queens.
Yeah. If the queens disappear from the board, White is winning. White has a 2 versus 1 advantage on the left, and even if Black's king goes after those pawns, White's king will go after Black's pawn on the right, and White will be ahead in any race. And that's a really nice move by Magnus Carlsen. I've seen him play so many queen endgames. He always knows when to centralize the queen. Queens are dominant in the center of the board, and now Magnus, not fearing any checks, he's going aggressive with his king. Also, look at the black king. It's actually cut off. It can never step towards the right now because White's queen dominates it. The black king is kind of caught in a cage, can only hang out on that left side of the board. That's why White's going aggressive with his own king on the other flank. And Now white gives a check, double attack, checking the black king and attacking black's pawn on the left-hand corner. It looks like Magnus, he's about to win this game. He's about to wrap it up. Maybe you still have to work a few things out. If you take that pawn as white, if you go and grab that pawn, you would have to deal with some checks. Magnus just gives another check himself instead.
Yeah, and all the time Magnus is building up the time, and it's Hikaru that is seconds down on the clock. And just look at the control that Magnus is doing with his queen. You know, every single move he's preventing checks. And Hikaru is desperately trying to hide his king behind some shelter. And Magnus, once again, moves his king and is not afraid of a few checks.
Yeah, that's a really nice strategy, actually. I mentioned that the black king couldn't get across to the right side. It has found its way, the black king, to that right side of the board. But as soon as the black king goes that way, white's king goes the other way. And white's king's going to the left suddenly. So Magnus just doing a bit of dodging, dipping, diving there, and he's outmaneuvered the opponent's pieces. And black's king now not contributing to the battle at all. It's essentially white's queen and king against the lone black queen. That's an extra piece for white. He's going to use that teamwork to win the game.
And look at that white king go. And, of course, Magnus is setting all the traps because black cannot capture the pawn, which is now on freeze, on account of white just sliding over with the queen and giving a check. And that is why Hikaru has moved his king, but it's just perfect strategy. The white king on the run, and it's headed one direction to the left.
One direction, indeed. Meanwhile, Magnus continues centralizing the white queen. White's king and queen there, occupying central squares. It's so beautiful.
Wow, yeah.
You barely even want to move those pieces. They look so good. Black's king, look at it, in the corner. Terrible. And white's king continues its journey. And look at it, the white king is not, it's not afraid.
Every move it makes, it just cannot be checked. I mean, what a beast that king is.
Complete domination.
Pure total. Yeah, Hikaru is just really in the last throes of the game.
Yep, Hikaru in the last throes of the game just has to sit and hope and move the black king up and down. All Magnus needs now is a winning plan. And he's going for it. He's giving a check. He will quite likely bring the white queen over to that left side and help the white king start winning some pawns. And yeah, that's what to do in endgames. As long as you realize you won't get checkmated, if your opponent's only attacking you with one piece, go active with your king. Why not? And Magnus was able to do that just because he had that extra kind of bonus of the extra pawn. And yeah, Nakamura has to react to that check. Nakamura, just his body language, he knows it's over. He knows there's pretty much no hope at this stage. He's just making moves. Magnus, all he needs to do, as the computer suggests, as Stockfish suggests, bring the queen over, threaten, well, challenge the black queen, force that black queen to give way, and white, with that 2 versus 1 advantage on the left, is going to make a second queen quite likely.
Yeah.
Wow. It's looking good for Magnus Carlsen, and he's really built up time on the clock as well. Dramatic for Hikaru. 15 seconds now.
He knows it's... I mean, it's the board, it's the clock, it's everything. And it was all that one mistake, that one trap he fell into earlier.
And look at Magnus, you know, actually his strategy is just perfection in itself. Every single move he's made has been about overprotection of his pieces and dominance. And Hikaru, all he can do is just shuffle the black queen backwards and forwards, and it's no good at all. And that is a killer move from Magnus.
Now the black queen forced to run away. White's king can step closer to those black pawns. First, Magnus gives a check. He's going to give a couple of checks to re-centralize his queen. Magnus, we've said it so many times, normally when we're talking about the opening or the middle game, he knows exactly where to put his pieces, right? He keeps finding checks and gains time to centralize his queen. And black is attacking a pawn right now, so Magnus needs to defend it, but there are several ways to do that. He's just playing with his food. And he checks again, centralizing his queen with tempo, gaining time to do that. And White's king is just going to step to that left now.
It's going to go to the left, and it's going to hide itself. And again, once again, Hikaru cannot do a single thing about this. There you go. The king is now attacking the pawn, and the king will hide itself behind the black pawn. And what can Hikaru do apart from just move the queen back to where it came from? And now Magnus just has a very pleasant choice. All he has to do is win that pawn, and those two pawns on the left will simply advance. And you can just see Hikaru shaking his head. He knows it's all over, and all because of that one big mistake.
And Magnus giving a few more checks, getting a bit more time on the clock. He's up to 2 minutes now, so he knows he's winning, and he's eradicated any risk of losing on time. And yeah, just great strategy. And okay, he moves his pawn forward, slowly advancing on every move.
Exactly. I mean, he doesn't give Hikaru one chance. No way has Magnus gone wrong at all.
We're running out of superlatives, Jovanka, for his play. It's just too strong.
It's just a model queen and pawn endgame. I mean, what can we say about this except admire perfection?
Is this what Magnus is expert in?
Yes.
I mean, endgames.
Yeah.
Even if the queens are on, we're calling this an endgame.
Yes, if it's just queens, it's definitely an endgame. It's a queen ending. And yeah, he knows exactly where to put the pieces, how to coordinate his pieces. That's the key thing. Also, he knows exactly when to run with his own king. And right now, White's king can actually take a pawn, but Black's queen is also threatening one of White's pawns. So I expect to see Magnus just take a timeout, protect that pawn first, not take any risk, and then the pawn next to the White king is going to drop off within the next couple of moves, for sure. Nakamura trying his best. We should give him some credit. He's been fighting. Yes, he did blunder earlier. He missed this idea, but he's been fighting. Magnus now steps up with the queen. Forgetting about that pawn on the right side, okay, which has been taken by the Black queen, but White's king now snacking on a pawn, and there's a clear path for both of White's pawns, actually, to run down the board. Those two are going to be much quicker than Black's one.
Yes. Okay, and now the pawn has come down. I mean, is there any chance with Hikaru perhaps giving a few spite checks? And, well, Hikaru tries, you know, he pins the pawn and prevents it from advancing, but now the Black king can simply actually step to the side, and it does that. Sorry, the White king, yeah. And step to the side, and now, look, there's another pawn to make Hikaru's life miserable.
Yeah, two's always better than one when it comes to passed pawns, especially when they're connected, when they can guide each other, hold each other's hands, and advance. And the White king, it will find a safe square because it can be sheltered by the White queen. There we go. And Black can continue giving checks if he wants, but those checks will eventually run out.
And one thing I expect Magnus to do is actually position his king on the same line as the Black king. And this just means that he can intercept any form of checks with potentially a queen, and there will be a pin against the queen and the king.
Yeah, that's very instructive. I expect maybe Magnus will step forward with his own queen first, and then he'll put his king along the 7th rank. Yeah, when you line up kings against each other, there's always tricks with checks and then kind of checks in reply. And
okay, he moves his king to the 7th row, and okay.
And yeah, sometimes we can't trust the analysis bar, but here it says 10.
Wow,
That's pretty trustworthy, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, that's simply because one queen is worth 9 points, 10 points. So White's about to make a second queen. That's why the advantage is 10, simply.
Do you think Hikaru will keep going until that second queen is on the board?
Yes. He should keep fighting because queen endings, there's always a small chance that you might, your opponent might accidentally repeat the position, trying to run away from the checks, for example, or your opponent might put their queen far away, and then you can continuously check forever. But here, White's queen is perfectly placed to guard her king.
So Magnus needs to be accurate here.
Yeah, still,
it's not easy.
It's not easy. Still a little bit of work to be done, but everything so far has been mightily impressive. And he's not rushing, that's the key thing.
Yeah, but Hikaru needs to rush. 18 seconds left on the clock. What will he do? Okay, moving his queen.
He gives one more check. The king does step back. And notice how Black can't... Well, Black didn't have time to go and pin White's pawn anymore because Black's own pawn was under fire. And the race has started, but White is ahead in this race. Also, White's queen protects the promotion square of Black's pawn. So even if Black were to get his pawn one square further down, White's queen would easily stop it.
Yeah, well, the pawn has advanced one more square, and I guess the only thing that Hikaru can do is... I was going to say not much, actually, now I think about it. Give up.
Yeah, but we might see 4 queens on the board. That would be cool. Okay, I thought Hikaru might push his own pawns down and make another queen, but yeah, White would have queened first, and then when Black promoted, White would have had the first move. He would have been able to give checks.
Magnus looks a bit shocked, actually. He did not see that move by Hikaru.
Oh, wow.
He's really cross with himself.
Actually, Magnus has to be really careful here suddenly. Hikaru has found a trick. I think there's only one move which wins cleanly. Probably a few moves win, but the cleanest move, there we see it.
Oh, wow.
There's a big difference between White's three choices here. You have to protect your queen. It's in a pin. You don't want to play queen takes queen, because then we'll go into another queen position. Magnus finds the best move. And now Black's pawn cannot advance. That was a key move by Magnus Carlsen. Black's pawn cannot advance. It's protecting the black queen. So now he's frozen black. And
so Hikaru's best shot is probably just to go queen takes queen, and after the queen is captured, push his own pawn.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this isn't necessarily the most optimum strategy.
Yeah, we see it just below the player's camera. Is it queen takes queen's the only move, otherwise it's plus 100.
Oh.
So that's a pretty big margin.
But he is thinking about it. 17 seconds to go, and he doesn't do it.
Doesn't do it.
Then we go to 100.
We're heading to 100. When the computer says plus 100, it's essentially because it sees an immediate win. There's just a clean win, maybe even a forced checkmate. Okay, a computer's horizons are far further than a human, so we should kind of take it tongue-in-cheek. But here, White's winning moves are all very logical.
Yeah, I mean, well, to stop the king from just advancing. Okay, Magnus gives a check.
Oh, his visualization of the board. I would be looking at pushing pawns, focusing on that top left-hand corner. Magnus, he uses every possible square, brings his queen down the bottom, then he'll swing it across, then he'll do everything with it. Impressive stuff by the world champion.
Yeah, he's very flexible, very universal. We kind of mentioned it a few times, how adaptable he is to different situations. I mean, I certainly agree with you, David. I was expecting Magnus simply just to push the king one square forward and
break the pin.
Break the pin and threaten to promote your own pawn.
Yeah, White's pawn cannot promote right now because it is pinned by the black queen against the white king. So why not step that king forward? Why not just prepare to make that second queen? But okay, maybe it was more effective on the last move. Right now, you feel that the white king and white queen aren't properly coordinated. So it's a bit strange of Magnus to play that move I actually praised, bring the queen the whole way down without having an idea in mind, but he loves his centralization. He loves putting his queen in the center of the board, stopping black's pawn from advancing as well. It would just be taken. So Magnus playing for domination rather than playing for checkmate.
Hikaru shaking his head. Is
3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. 1 second he had left. Sorry, Kaya.
Yeah.
I interrupted there.
No, absolutely. Oh, and there he resigns. It's over. Hikaru Nakamura loses the third game in the first match in the final. Magnus Carlsen winning and saying something, and we definitely see a smile on the world champion's face, getting the first win in the final. And oh, that was Hikaru Nakamura's face. Basically around when he realized some trouble was happening.
Yeah, and he saw it coming. We saw that really unique face from him as well. He saw it coming, but he couldn't avoid it. There were just too many traps, too many complications, and he didn't manage to navigate them with little time on his clock.
Wow, a huge win for Magnus Carlsen, getting the first win in this final. He is now up by 1 point in the big final against his big rival, Hikaru Nakamura. This is his reaction right after the game. I think maybe that's like the first smile we've seen on Magnus Carlsen's face throughout the new In Chess Classic. That must feel so good for him. And with 1 game to go in the first match, it's a must-win situation for Hikaru Nakamura. But David, this game, take us through the highlights. There was many of them.
Yeah, so many highlights. The game, though, was decided by this one slip by Nakamura. And it's probably the most natural move on the board. So we can't blame him for falling into it. Ivanka, you predicted this happening. I thought here, White has this pin along this diagonal, black's queen undefended. Also, White is eyeing up this pawn. So what is more natural than solving 2 problems with 1 move? Black's queen could bring itself across, defending the rook still and defending this pawn. But this turned out to be the losing mistake. Instead, black probably had to move that pawn just 1 square. And the reason this was a losing mistake is because Nakamura forgot to consider the checks in this position. And diagonal checks in queen endgames are always the most effective. White sidestepped with the queen. Actually, Magnus just repeated the position 1 time, but he sidestepped with the queen, checking the black king. And after the king stepped forward, the second time, he just traded the rooks. And we should mention here, the reason black is lost is because if he takes with the king, this must be what Nakamura missed. Suddenly, the queen slides across with a skewer. Once Black's king steps away from the check, Black's queen would drop because it's on a weak square. And instead, Nakamura had to take with the queen, but now he no longer protects his bishop. And we saw a long queen endgame, but Nakamura was unable to fight back. But he sidestepped with the queen, checking the black king. The reason Black is lost is because if he takes with the king.
All right, coming up in Game 4 on the first day in the final, Hikaru Nakamura against Magnus Carlsen. Nakamura with the white pieces in a must-win situation if he wants to tie the match. It's going to be an exciting one. Magnus Carlsen definitely keeping his cool in that third game. Tomorrow, we're going to show you how Magnus did when David Howell challenged him to a game of chili chess. All right,
Magnus Carlsen, get ready to lose to the good old David Chili Willy Howell. You either lose on the board or you give up eating the next chili.
Oh, I need more milk. Fuck. My mouth so far. Please, all of it, all of it.
Just gets worse, right? Every challenge is worse than the next one.
The things you get him to say, the chili.
Chili Willy Howell.
I'm glad this is water.
All right, that's coming up tomorrow, you guys. It's going to be so much fun. David Howell against Magnus Carlsen in a game of chili chess. They have to eat chili whenever they lose a piece. It is so much fun.
It was fun too.
Yeah, it's so much fun. All right, we are now joined by Ginger GM Simon Williams. Hi, Simon.
Hi there. Hi, Chili Willy and friends. Nice to see you all.
I hear rumors you would actually do quite well in a game of chili chess, Simon.
Well, I like a bit of spice now and again, so I'll probably do better than David by the looks of that little trailer there. I just feel sorry for David, like you said. What are you going to get him doing like next tour? It's getting worse and worse. So I can only imagine where this is going to lead. So in water, freezing, chili. Poor guy.
Life's too short to say no, right?
It is Chili Willy. I agree. So yeah.
You next time, Simon.
Yeah, so we have Ginger GM and then we have Chili GM. I don't know. It's going to be Chili Willy Howell GM. Yeah, I don't know. All right, Simon. Well, it's definitely hot as well in the final now. What's your reaction after Magnus winning that third game?
Yeah, I mean, they've been very close games. I was a bit surprised by that last game because it looked like Magnus wasn't really trying at one point. Maybe he's waiting for the football to finish. I'm not sure. But then at some point he suddenly turned on the button, turned on the key, and he played really well. I mean, he played with his quiet moves. Then suddenly it was like bang, and he got the tactics going, and it just seemed like he's in control of the pace. And I think that's maybe the key thing. Like, he's the one who's deciding when to play for a win, when to play, not to play for a win. And that's really important because it's like you are deciding what's going to happen. But very impressive, I think, so far from him.
And obviously, it's going to be a must-win situation for Hikaru in that last game. Going to be exciting. But we're also following, of course, the battle for third place, Simon. And I think the fourth game just finished in spectacular fashion. So Mamadjaro won that game, which means they have tied.
Wow, that's brilliant because I think that means that Black, player with the black pieces, has won every single game. Is that right? Which is really unheard of in chess. And that means there's no draws, and that's also unheard of at this level. So what an exciting match that is.
Wow, that is just kind of shocking. They have actually then tied the first match in the battle for third place. So it's going to be super interesting tomorrow. And I know you have been following a few of these games, haven't you, Simon?
I have, yeah. And there was, I think, an interesting moment. I think it was the second game when Mamadjaro had the black pieces and managed to win. And it's always exciting. I'm really glad that Mamadjaro is in this competition because just the way he plays chess, you can always expect something aggressive, something crazy, some kind of attack, even if it doesn't work. And I really appreciate that way of playing. But we have this situation here on the board, and it's quite a strange situation because you can see the white knight in the center of the board is being attacked by the black pawn. And Aronian now has to decide really where to move that knight. Of course, he can take the black knight, but moving the white knight seems very natural. And there's many squares it can move to. It can even come forwards into the middle with a check. It can go sideways. And Aronian picks the only bad square, really, it can go to. And he moves it back to get in the way of his bishop. And you don't really want to get your pieces discombobulated, congesting each other, and that knight goes now back in front of the dark square bishop. And the problem is he now creates an outpost for the black knight, and the black knight dives straight in to the guts of white's position into a square, 2 squares in front of the king. And this wouldn't have been possible if it was not for white's last move, because before, you remember, that bishop is now blocked. The bishop could have taken that knight previously, and the game is over very quickly here. So we can see a couple more moves. Look at that knight, though, so powerful, like a big octopus, just controlling everything. The light square bishop comes out, so Aronian tries to develop. And here we see Aronian just falling apart, but Mamedyarov playing with his normal Chili Willy style. G5, the pawn comes up. And okay, in this position, it's, well, I think now Aronian tries taking that one. No, actually, let me get the moves there. So we've got G5. And he falls apart very quickly. Sorry, he goes G3. He tries to keep it under control, moving the pawn, and black just opens everything up. He takes the pawn, gets the rook into the game, and then finally that black knight, just keep an eye on the black knight, it comes in with a big check. And over the course of a couple of moves, you can see that white's king is clearly in just a load of trouble, and Aronian loses this very quickly. But what a match. I mean, they've had 4 wins in that match. So very, very exciting chess. And I think tomorrow is going to be a brilliant fight for third place there.
Is this basically 2 players with just fantastically entertaining, sacrificing, attacking styles of chess? Or is it because they're playing for the 3rd place, or they're taking a few more chances?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, I think when the pressure's off a little bit, I mean, obviously first place is where you want to be. You can play with a little bit more flair, a little bit less stress. So you can be like, okay, if I lose this game, it doesn't matter so much, but don't, you know, let's not kid ourselves that they really want to, one of them wants to come 3rd, and it's a big fight between them. So they don't want to lose this match. And I think they're both very entertaining players in their own right. So that also obviously affects how the game's going.
Definitely. But then we're obviously now looking so much forward to the final game. And the final, Hikaru Nakamura has to win that one. What do you think of it, Simon?
Well, we've seen a situation a couple of days previously, haven't we, where Magnus has got 1 point ahead and his opponent has needed to win. But normally they've had, Magnus has had the white pieces. At least in this situation, Hikaru has the white pieces, which gives him some chance. Hikaru is a brilliant player. I love his expressions when he's playing. You can just see how much the games mean to him. And with the white pieces, I think he's got a chance. You know, I would still say the way Magnus is playing, he won't win, but it's going to be exciting. Hikaru's got to go for it. He's got to take risks. He might as well lose or draw. It doesn't matter if he loses. It's the same as drawing. You know, but he's got to try to win. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
All right. Simon, thank you so much for joining us again, and we look forward to see you on the final day tomorrow.
Yeah, it'd be great. I'm looking forward to that chili challenge as well. That looks fantastic. And yeah, I can see that David's going to have the milk ready there and everything else. So yeah, brilliant.
It's going to be so much fun. Thanks, Simon. All right. Well, we didn't only do the chili challenge down there at the Good Night pub. We also tested Magnus and different things. We have shown you a few videos of this throughout the tournament, and we're going to give you a rerun of the test we did on sort of multitasking. We did a blitz interview with Magnus.
So Magnus, what did you have for dinner yesterday?
Yeah, what did I have for dinner?
What is your all-time favorite movie?
This one is tough. The position is good.
What is the best game you ever played?
Oh, this is really tough. It's probably one of my least favorite questions because I generally hate my games.
Who is your celebrity crush?
I seriously don't have one. Does that work?
What are you better at than all other chess players?
Oh, that is a very good question. I would say that I'm fairly universal, and this sucked a little bit.
Is there something you would love to learn or get better at?
I think playing an instrument is pretty high up the list.
Guitar
or piano, probably.
What is your favorite place in the world?
Oh, well, I went to South Africa when I was little. I liked that.
Who is your favorite?
Faster.
Who is your favorite athlete?
These questions are so difficult. Like, I have no...
Or footballer. I know you love football.
Where is the decisive?
What is your...
I like Salah, obviously. He's always in my fantasy
Mohamed
team.
Salah. And what is your favorite 80s song?
Stop bothering me.
Oh shit.
Final countdown?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Nice.
Okay, nice.
How was it like answering the questions at the same time?
I was really annoying.
Magnus Carlsen really didn't like that, answering questions when he was playing.
Yeah, multitasking, it's hard work, right? For everyone.
Yeah.
He didn't answer a single question.
I know. It wasn't really a Blitz interview. It was just some Blitz questions and Magnus playing chess, basically. All right, we have to take a look at the results. After 3 games in the final, they played 2 draws, and then Magnus, in a spectacular game, won the 3rd one against Hikaru Nakamura. That means the Norwegian is up by 1 point before the final game in the first match. Hikaru Nakamura, he has to win this one to tie the match, and we did see the battle for 3rd place. The first match is over. They have tied, winning 2 games each with the black pieces, all those wins. So yeah, that's been a spectacular one. But right now we're looking forward to the final game in the final, and this one is intense. And Hikaru Nakamura said it yesterday, David. It was about controlling his nerves. And what will those nerves be like right now?
Right now, well, they will be jangling, but he has to put them to one side. At least he knows in this game, a draw is the same as the loss, and Nakamura shaking his head, laughing. Maybe he's wondering where Magnus is. Yeah, in that last game, it was in the end decided by nerves. Magnus was putting on the pressure, as Simon Williams said. Magnus was the one dictating the pace of the game, choosing when to sacrifice, when to set those traps. Naka, in the end, eventually cracked. And
all right. Okay. Nodding his head here. Okay, right now he's looking very confident. And Jovanka, what do you expect from the white opening of Hikaru here?
Well, I would expect Hikaru to actually go a little bit hard and immediately start to put the world champion under pressure. Because like David and Simon both said, you know, a draw is the same as a loss for him. So he has to just try, and he has to... We've seen Magnus Carlsen be a little bit shaky when the position gets a bit complicated. So I would immediately stir the game into something a little bit less clear-cut, definitely nothing simple. And you can see Hikaru is just making the moves, and he chooses a system that we actually call the slow Slav. And it's not renowned for being the most sharpest of openings, but it does have a little bit of a kick to it.
Yeah, and these guys, they have played against each other before in this opening. When I was preparing for Hikaru Nakamura a few years ago in the Gibraltar Masters, I realized that every time Nakamura faced the Slav, he went for the slow Slav. Yeah, these guys, I based my preparation on clashes between them. Nakamura against Carlsen. So black in these openings tends to be slightly passive, but super solid, rock solid. And Carlsen, he's hoping that that solidity does give him at least the half point that he needs to win today's match. Look at this, the black bishop jumping out, creating a pin very early. That black bishop tends to be the problem piece, the problem child in the Slav defense. That bishop often is blocked behind pawns. So first Magnus brings the bishop out, and then, only then, he will plant pawns on light squares. And, okay, question to answer for that bishop. Do you capture the knight? He does. This is the most simple way of playing against the slow Slav opening. White now has the bishop pair, but black, with his pawn structure, look at all the black's pawns on light squares, forming a bit of a triangle there. Black is so solid.
It's incredibly solid. And, yeah, you know, now we're waiting for Hikaru to decide on what approach to take. We are asking for a quiz of the day. If you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? And in order to enter the competition, you can tweet your answers using the hashtags #ChessChamps, #Opera, and #NewInChess. And Mink DeVille says that he would prepare by imagining Magnus. And David, you will love this, as a poor man's David Howell.
I wish.
We like that answer. And TQ Payne says if they had to play Magnus, they would make the call to next World Championship challenger Ian Nepomniachtchi and ask him to share some of his preparations with him. If I manage to draw, I guess all three of us will be satisfied. Yeah, a win-win scenario. And finally, incredibly bad says that he would cut lots of onions to prepare his eyes for the incessant bawling that would occur as Magnus ruthlessly crushed him. Yep.
Your chilies would work just as well as onions.
I can't wait to see that. And I'm very relieved that I didn't actually have to do that challenge, David.
Yeah, so how are you with, like, spicy food, David? Or when you're at, like, an Indian restaurant or something like that? What do you order?
My go-to dish is the butter chicken because it's not spicy at all. Maybe a lamb korma if I'm feeling very adventurous, but that was a different level altogether. Okay, meanwhile, in this game, players, they both castled. White bring a rook to the center. After that early trade that we mentioned, the bishop for knight, ever since that, both sides just developing pieces to very natural squares. White, with his last move, bringing the rook across, is preparing potentially to open up the center by pushing the pawn next to the white queen. And will Nakamura do that? Okay, he's looking up. He's looking up to the right, then to the left. I doubt he'll have seen this exact position before, but maybe something similar. Normally when he looks up to the right, he is calculating, trying to work out some stuff, and he's just trying to work out whether it is possible to push the pawn in the center. He says no, and he just drops back with the white queen. This is why it's called the slow Slav opening, because normally the players slow play it. Lots of tension is left, lots of pieces on the board, and it will be down to whether white can crack black solidity.
Right, and this is in fact the main move. Hikaru has chosen something that's a little bit cautious. It's just simply sidestepping with the queen just to get out of any potential dangers that would be involved in black, pushing open the pawn center. And yeah, I agree with you, David. It is a very slow start to the game, but it is all going to revolve around the bishop pair and black's center. Because if white can somehow push open the center, mobilize the dark square bishop, then white will have a very comfortable advantage. Okay, so Magnus also following the theory, the trends, and also moves the queen. And now the main move is just to actually step forward with the dark squared bishop, move it one square, and just wait for black to respond.
Yeah, so this is the main move, but the other one that Nakamura might be considering now and over the next half dozen turns is when to open up the center with this pawn push, pushing the pawn forward, creating this kind of this deadly trio, and the three musketeers here, and one of them will get captured, probably the pawn that has just advanced. But once knights are traded, this position, white having more space and the bishop pair, white having a nice pawn center, black is supposed to be ultra solid in these types of positions. Black, notice how he's putting pawns on light squares because he lacks a light squared bishop. So it's very hard to break down this formation, although white is the only one who can really be better because of these two guys. The bishop pair, when things eventually do open up, maybe 20, 30 moves down the line, these bishops will finally come to life. So this is what Hikaru Nakamura is considering. He's just wondering whether this gives him the most winning chances, or if he thinks black is just too solid here, he will just maneuver in this position by advancing his bishop. Maybe the other idea in the position is to just shuffle the rook across and later on advance pawns on this side of the board. This one is slower, keeping more tension. The other one more direct. So what will Nakamura's strategy be?
Yeah, in fact, I've played this position from both sides of the board, and I've actually favoured both types of position. One thing that I would say about moving forward with the pawn, it's very direct, and it tends to be too direct. It allows black to make the play a little bit clear-cut. And the most popular move, it tends to be the bishop move, precisely because you keep your options flexible. And it looks ridiculous because often you'll be like manoeuvring around on the bottom row. But it's like a spring. White will uncurl the position and then suddenly blast open, and this dark square bishop will be the heroine or hero of the day.
Yeah, I agree. Just being very direct, pushing in the center. When I was young, I used to think that was the only way to play chess. I used to think, okay, if you can open the center, especially for bishops, if you can be really direct, try and create an attack, you'll win the game. But then I met an English grandmaster called Keith Arkle, and that pawn structure with black, he is the leading expert. He's played it his whole life, and he makes it look like black's solid structure is almost just winning. White will kind of break against that wall, and white will eventually run out of energy. White being too far advanced, and black counterattacking later on. So the direct strategy here, which Nakamura is considering, maybe just isn't suited for the match situation. Personally, in these must-win type of scenarios, I always like to keep as much tension and hope that the opponent gets nervous. But Magnus, unlikely to get nervous because he's watching the football.
Still watching. It's only, I think, like 30 minutes left of that game. Yeah. So hopefully he's going to be able to finish this game without a game of football.
There is, just while we're waiting for a response, I just wanted to show one big strategical idea that White has in this position. And it doesn't quite work in this particular position, and I'll show you why. But something that White would love to do is actually push the pawn forward to attack the bishop. And then once the bishop retreats, then what you would want to do is you want to control the play in the center and you push your pawn forward. And unfortunately, you know, it doesn't quite work here because black will challenge the pawn size on the left side of the board. And then when you support that pawn, then black can undermine it even further. And now this this structure, if you can get away with it, I call it the big clamp, because it just suffocates black. Unfortunately here, there's just no way to maintain that pawn. And this is one of the strategical ideas between developing the bishop. So now, as you can see, if White were to advance with the pawns, then it can be supported because the rooks are connected.
Yeah, the reason it doesn't work in this position for White is because this pawn, you need to keep it on this square, and you can't defend it with your own pawn, because suddenly, right at the very end, after pawn takes pawn, White's rook is not protected, and that's why, as Jovanka mentioned, you need to connect the rooks first. Black would just win a rook with this formation. So in the game position, White did decide to bring the bishop forward, and now that is his plan, because this guy in the corner is defended. So that is still the plan, to advance all those pawns, create that big clamp, and just try and suffocate Black's position. But Black has a move, so how would you stop that, Jovanka? How would you stop your own idea if you were on the black side? You mentioned you played this with White, with Black, you know all the plans. If this is White's plan, to push this pawn forward and then this pawn forward, how would you stop that?
Well, you can either kind of take the pawn, and your whole idea with taking the pawn is that once White captures with the bishop, then you suddenly start to strike in the center with pushing your own pawn. That's one way how to do it. Another way would be to not capture the pawn and just go immediately in the center. But, you know, Magnus is aware of these big strategical ideas, and so he will not allow it. He will not make a pass move. Like a pass move would be, I don't know, move a pawn somewhere.
Yeah, if you just wait and move a pawn, then suddenly this idea would completely suffocate Black's pieces. This knight dead, this bishop dead, no future. And, okay, Magnus, he does go for your earlier idea. He trades pawns and then he pushes in the center. The reason you should do this is because when you're facing the bishop pair, the two bishops, you need to accelerate the play. You can't just sit and wait, because those bishops, they gain in power as the game goes on. You need to be fast. You need to be accurate and direct. And this pawn push with black pushing this pawn forward, it makes sense because it's making use of these two pieces. You want to open things up for these two guys. And after pawn takes, wow, a huge amount of choice. You can recapture this in 3 different ways. Knight, bishop, and queen, they all make sense. Let's see how the opening of the position favors Magnus. And personally, I think that last move by Nakamura isn't the most accurate.
But is he making moves that sort of tells us he is fighting for a win? Being in a must-win situation, he just has to take risks. Is that what he's doing at this point?
Yeah, he's kind of, I don't think he's so familiar with the theory, if I'm being honest here. He seems to have given Magnus quite a nice position. Magnus has, as David said, accelerated the play on account of the 2 bishops. And what we're seeing here is that, look at the queens and the bishop and the 2 knights. They're all working in beautiful harmony. And what's normally happened to me in these type of situations is that there's been some kind of kickback. You know, either someone has attacked my bishop or has even tried to soften things up on the right side of the board by pushing the pawn that we call the H-pawn 2 squares forward, just to kind of lengthen the diagonal of the dark squares.
Yes, so that's one move Ginger GM, Simon Williams, would definitely recommend. Picking up Harry the H-pawn, pushing it forward to try and loosen up White's king. White's king already slightly airy on that side, and yeah, I definitely think Magnus has a good position, but again, he can't just be complacent. He can't just think, oh, I'm going to play for the draw, because if you just try and swap everything off, White's going to be left with the 2 bishops. White will be left with a bishop pair. And any endgame, if you imagine everything traded off, except for those 2 white bishops, and maybe black having a bishop and a knight, the 2 bishops will dominate. They will be able to control both sides of the board, and White will have a huge advantage. So black cannot relax. Black cannot relax, and that's why Magnus is having a bit of a longer think now. He needs to find a way to continue accelerating that play, continue getting active, and I like Jovanka's move, trying to maybe go on the attack with a pawn right now. Lots of choice for the world champion. Let's see how he reacts. He pushes another pawn on the other flank instead, kicking back one of White's bishops. That is very expansive, and it shows that the world champion, he's not trying to draw this game by just sitting still and being solid and passive. He's not afraid to take some small strategic risks, at least. That white bishop now on a worse square can be attacked by a knight. Black can continue pushing pawns on that left side.
Well, he must remember what happened in the semi-final against Levon Aronian. On the first day, he won Game 3, and then he lost Game 4 against Levon. Do you think he's sort of... is that haunting him today?
Possibly, and maybe the one big difference between that game and this one is look at the kings. Black's king is very safe right now, behind a wall of 3 pawns. And
yeah, and I remember where Magnus's king was in that Game 4. No, I don't, David.
Okay, you don't, but we remember it was in trouble, though.
Okay, yeah. No, well, I don't remember that either. But if you say so.
I trust your memory, Kaya. But yeah, Magnus, when he has lost after being in the lead, often it is when he maybe just relaxes a bit too soon, when he allows his king to get attacked. And so far, he hasn't allowed that against Nakamura in the whole match today, and I doubt he'll be allowing that in this one.
Okay, well, Magnus has actually chosen one of the plans that I mentioned, the big kickback, and has now started advancing pawns on the left side of the board and just asking questions to the light squared bishop. What are you going to do? And Hikaru just steps back. Now, this position does look like what is White doing, but you have to bear in mind it is still beneficial for White in the long term, and it's all about the use of the dark squared bishop that White has. Now, so this means that Black should be trying to accelerate the play, shouldn't just be trading off pieces. And what do you think Magnus will do? Will he go hard?
He'd love to go hard. I'm not sure how he can go immediately on the offensive on creating
Harry
assault. keep wanting to push Harry.
Because they've done this to me all the time.
I think maybe the opportunity's passed, Jovanka, I'm not sure.
You think so?
I think if Harry had been pushed, there would have been consequences. Okay, Magnus first stepping back with the queen.
Okay.
Let's bring up the analysis board. We can show that Magnus in this position stepped back with his queen, attacking this pawn. But the move you wanted, Jovanka, I think this would have been very strong a few moments ago, because Black pushing Harry the H-pawn, trying to undermine this point and attacking this white pawn. If it steps away, there would be danger along this diagonal. But now if you do it, maybe white would just advance in the center and maybe some problems. The queen would be attacked next move. So that's why maybe Magnus decided against committing Harry the H-pawn. This time he stepped back with the queen, attacking this pawn. It was defended by white's king, and Magnus pushing forward on the left side. He's playing on that flank clearly, and Nakamura stopping the advance. You mentioned in the last game, Jovanka, Magnus, he loves pushing his rook's pawns, but only when supported by a rook. I think he's playing on that left side of the board rather than against white's king right now, and I expect to see Magnus try and reroute this knight maybe into this square if he can, where it would attack a pawn. It would also eye up one of white's bishops.
Yeah, that is a great knight maneuver. I mean, we've also seen Magnus be superb at manoeuvring their pieces to their optimum squares, and I do like that knight suggestion. Now, the reason why I suggested that Harry pawn is because I was playing the former women's world champion Antonetta Stefanova in this particular line, and I played her many, many times, and she would always advance a Harry, and I would always think, oof, I don't like my position too much. So, okay, anyway.
Very aggressive player, that's why.
And, okay, well, Magnus has actually gone for a different knight maneuver with the exact same aim. He has centralized the knight, attacking the white bishop. White bishop dropped back, and, well, what's to stop Magnus from just... well, it's perhaps not the right time to come in with the knight. It was a crafty move by Hikaru Nakamura, you know, moving the bishop towards the edge. But if the knight jumps forward, then the white bishop will simply move one square to the left, and that's an unpleasant pin.
Yeah, that light squared bishop, it looks like a mysterious move, but it is going to slide to the left. And it's going to be on the same diagonal as the black queen and the black king. That bishop doing a great long-range job. So Magnus, if he doesn't want to bring his knight into that square that we were discussing, that square we were highlighting, the problem is what else? He has committed his knight to the center of the board. It was definitely destined to go to that square. Magnus may be having to come up with a backup plan, something that he hadn't reckoned on. I'm very sure that he would not have seen that move. It definitely wasn't my radar either. A nice idea by Nakamura to reroute that bishop.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Magnus thinking down to 8 minutes now, looking calm and focused, not looking off to any football games right now. And he is trying to just draw this game. That will be enough to win the first match in the final. We know he's still trying to win his first tournament in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. He is so close now.
Closer than he's ever been.
Yeah.
And yeah, he'll be kicking himself at the end of the event if he lets this slip away. And he'll be kicking himself at the end of today if he loses this game, Magnus Carlsen. But I really like what Hikaru has done, despite the fact we thought maybe he wasn't so familiar with the opening Nakamura. He has found a way to keep a lot of life in the position, a lot of pieces still on the board. He's found this nice idea, rerouting his bishop to kick away the black queen, to stop black's key idea of planting a knight in white's half of the board. So Nakamura, as well, having the time advantage, everything he's been doing perfectly in these must-win situations. That's the key. Keeping tension, making your opponent work for the draw, for the result they need. And, what do you think, Jovanka? Chances right now after the opening stage?
It's very balanced. I think it's very early to say because, you know, white's position has a lot of, I've talked about this before, lots of hidden potential. Especially, you know, the bishops don't look very attractive right now, but you can imagine a situation where the white bishop has maneuvered itself to a better diagonal and the black bishop has actually taken a step back, allowing white to go forward with the pawns and start the big push. And then suddenly you can see that, well, black's position is on the verge of collapse. So, again, I think the initiative now is on black. He needs to do something, otherwise he is going to get kicked back. And I'm trying to figure out what to do, and that isn't an easy answer, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy answer. That's why Magnus spent 3 minutes on that move and ended up just retreating his queen one square. Not a move he would have been happy to play. And now Nakamura, having come up with that ingenious bishop retreat that he played last turn, it makes sense to continue with that maneuver, right? Put the bishop on the left, and okay, he doesn't. He retreats his other bishop first, clearing a line for White's rook. Peter Lecco, one of the world's best players and one of the world's best commentators, he told me that it's one of my bad habits to always put my bishop on that square. And as soon as he said it, I realized, oh my God, I'm doing it every game. But I hadn't been aware until this point. And that square that the bishop has just found itself on, it doesn't look great, but it does protect some pawns near the white king, and it will be ready later on, once other pieces have been traded, to jump out into the black position. So I really like what Nakamura has been doing with his bishops.
Totally agree with you, David. And it's actually very instructive to maneuver that bishop, the dark square bishop, to that square. I mean, it's a key idea in this opening. I mean, it clears the path for the rooks and also prepares the pawn advance that will be coming, not necessarily now, but it's definitely in the atmosphere for maybe the next 20 moves or so. But yeah, I remember Peter Lecco having a chat with us.
Yeah, you were there.
I was there, and he kind of called you a contortionist. He said David always gets some position in the opening, and then he has to really contort himself to get out of it, and he confuses everyone with some mind tricks, and he wins.
Well, sometimes. But another person who likes his mind tricks and likes his contortions is Magnus Carlsen. And one thing I don't like about what Magnus did is, you remember earlier, he brought his knight into the centre of the board. Now it's gone back to exactly where it came from. So Magnus, in effect, losing 2 moves. And when you're manoeuvring around, when you're coming up with these long-term plans, losing 2 moves often is the decider whether that is a successful plan or whether your opponent's plan will be quicker. And yeah, I'm surprised. I disagree with the evaluation bar being over on Magnus Carlsen's side, because I think the last few moves, they have been looking very promising for Nakamura.
Right. So I agree with you, David. I really like what Nakamura's done, especially when you compare it to a few moves ago. You actually see that every piece has improved. And Magnus now steps forward with the bishop. This was his hidden point. But what is that bishop doing?
I'm not sure. It's eyeing up White's knight. But, oh wow, there's a crazy tactic in the position. White's knight can be captured by that black bishop at some point, but you don't want to give away your 2 bishops. And White in the current position, I mentioned there's a crazy tactic. Let's bring up the analysis board, because there is one option that's so sneaky for Nakamura. I did not see this. It's so hard to see for any human, but Stockfish does mention it as one of White's best moves. It is to give up a piece, sacrificing a piece. He doesn't go for it. He just improves the white rook. But he could have played knight takes pawn. And after pawn takes knight, look at this. The bishop, the passive bishop, jumps forward suddenly, trapping the black queen. The black queen has nowhere to go because it is under fire from this bishop. Also, the other bishop does control the other diagonal. This is why 2 bishops are so powerful. They create this kind of X-ray along the diagonals. And here, black would have been in huge trouble. He would have had to give back a piece just to block that attack and save the queen. So maybe an interesting opportunity for Hikaru Nakamura. It would have at least shocked the world champion. Magnus would have almost fallen out of his chair, I think, if that move, that knight capture, had been played. But instead, Nakamura just improving a piece. It was hard to see, right, Ivanka?
It was difficult to see because, I mean, it's such a long-range idea, you know, to trap the queen in the middle of the board. You know, that's kind of so rare. It doesn't happen.
But is it something maybe you could have seen in over the board? That maybe they would have taken 20 minutes, 30 minutes to calculate, sit and look at the board and found that move?
Well, I think the thing is you have to be looking for the idea and you have to recognise that the black queen didn't have any squares. And then once you spot it, then you see it instantly. But if you don't actually, if you don't even see the idea that the queen is trapped, I think even whether it's over the board, internet chess, blitz chess, you just won't play it.
Yeah, over the board, I would have been 100% confident that they would at least see it, but not necessarily play it. The problem, I think the only issue is that White had such a natural improving move, improving his worst placed piece. And in rapid chess, you don't stop. You just think, okay, that piece is doing nothing, let's improve it. And then the game goes on. But in classical chess, at least one thing I notice a lot of grandmasters do, they do look at the direct checks, captures and threats. That's what's hammered home to us when we're kids. For the grandmasters, they do this just by instinct. So,
but David,
20 seconds.
I have to ask the question because there's a lot of drama on the board because Magnus has put his knight on a loose square.
Wow, that is bizarre stuff from the world champion.
Totally unheard of, you know. It's just asking for that knight to be attacked, and Hikaru obliges and says, yes, fine. I mean, was Magnus only calculating...
Look at his face.
Forcing moves? I mean, he's so unhappy.
Yeah, he did not see this one coming. Black's just put his knight, like you said, on a loose square. Not only is the Black Knight attacked right now because White has retreated his knight, opening up the line for the queen, but there's also a threat of White's bishop at the bottom of the board, pinning that Black Knight. Everything's just wrong with the black position. Also, that Black Knight, it can't move, or maybe it doesn't want to move at least, because the pawn behind it is vulnerable.
Right, and if the knight does actually retreat back to where it came from, the queen gets trapped.
Yeah. I mean, Magnus Carlsen there, we see already even Black's best moves give White a +1 or more advantage in most of the lines. So it's damage limitation time for Carlsen. The last, I don't like his last half dozen moves, his last 6-7 moves. It just feels like he's changing plans on every turn. He's making moves and only then thinking about the consequences. And look at the clock, 3 minutes for Carlsen, 9 for Nakamura. It's bad, desperate times for Carlsen fans. He's really struggling right now, shaking his head as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. I mean, what a surprising move from Magnus. I did not expect that at all. I mean, because it's just asking for the knight to be attacked. And I agree with you. I don't think I would necessarily retreat the knight, but then you run into all sorts of tactical motifs, such as pins. I mean, I would be worried about the bishop coming to attack the knight and my knight being forever saddled in...
Look at Magnus. He's not happy right now at all. He's so annoyed with himself for not even spotting this idea. And what he needs to do is just stop stop whatever he's watching, just stop getting distracted, just focus, because this is last chance now to save this game already, I think. First thing I would do is I would trade rooks in the center of the board. Just take some ammunition away from White's army and distract either White's queen or White's rook, and then just find a way to relocate that knight. Okay, he does trade rooks. And he moves the Black Queen away. Notice how it's not on the square where it could have been trapped earlier. It's not going to walk into any pins from White's dark square bishop, at least. But what do you think, Becca? White can just improve. He can bring his rook back from where it came from.
Yeah.
He can centralize the White Knight.
He can improve his bishop. I mean, so much choice in the position. I personally I like your rook move. Hunting the pawns, of course, and putting pressure on Magnus. I mean, suddenly the whole position just starts to creak.
Yeah, it's not even the knight now. It's the pawn behind the knight. That's just going... I mean, it's doomed, right?
Totally. And it's not just that as well. I mean, I'm just looking at the light square bishop that is hiding. It's a sleeping giant in the corner. And I can just see a situation where the black pieces are cut off from the defense of anything that's going to happen on the right. And look at the White Queen, can switch both sides. This is a real serious problem. Okay, let's try to do some repair work. Oh no, actually, first of all, let's have a look for Hikaru. What should he play?
Yeah, lots of choice, and just below the players' cameras, we do see the top computer suggestions, the top computer moves. One of them, very natural, planting White's knight in the middle of the board. The other two, much less natural, pushing pawns near the White King. I would, well, I'm not going to bet anything, but I would be shocked to see White push pawns in front of his king, because I don't think you need to do that. You only weaken your own king if it's vital, or if you get immediate gains for it. It's just impractical to weaken your own king and then have to worry about protecting it a bit later on. So Nakamura, what else could he be thinking about? Maybe planting the White Knight in the center, eyeing up the Black Knight, like you said.
I agree with you. I don't think White is going to be pushing pawns. I mean, it just it's not the right time. This is something that I would be leaving for the endgame portion when the king is entirely safe. But actually, planting the White Knight, do you think that that's something that will come to Hikaru's mind? Because I'm a little bit concerned that you get so focused on attacking the Black Knight and chasing it away that you might not see the best move. And there you go. You see Hikaru slides away with the rook, and now the threat is on the knight. I mean, if it hadn't been for that move, I think knight set to the center would have been the most natural move.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this one just too tempting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have possibly played this one myself as Nakamura, but the only reason I don't like it is because if Black's knight now moves, which it has done, once White's queen brings itself up and captures a black pawn, Black's bishop will be able to capture one of White's pawns on the left-hand side, and it would gain time against the white rook. So maybe not the ideal move by Nakamura, but Magnus retreating his knight there, still, he is the one fighting to save his skin, save his bacon in this game.
Is that a word as well?
Yeah, save his bacon, yeah. Don't ask me where it came from, I don't know.
In English, he likes bacon, but he needs to save it.
In English, we have a lot of funny expressions.
Yeah, you really do. I love it. All right, well, Magnus is trying to save his bacon. Is it going to be hard for him? Or is it hard for Nakamura to find that win?
It's still hard to find a win, but I think Nakamura's main problem is that he's got so many tempting moves at every turn, and that's why he started to burn time. He had a huge time advantage, actually, just a few moments ago, or a couple of moves ago, but that is starting to be eaten away. It's starting to disappear. He still has 4 minutes extra on the clock, though. So he has a bit of a luxury. We've seen it in the past, though. When clocks tick down, especially in that last game that Magnus won, when clocks tick down, he is the favourite in every matchup, even against a speed demon like Nakamura. And the only things, I think, that are preventing him from moving immediately, from maybe playing queen takes pawn, or maybe centralising or improving the white knight, the only things stopping him are the being spoilt for choice and maybe the nerves that he talked about in his interview yesterday.
Yeah, because if there's one thing you can't have is you can't have a nervy approach when you're facing the world champion Magnus, because he is ruthless and he will pounce. And while the players are thinking, I think it's a good time to bring up some more answers to our quiz of the day, where we're asking everyone, if you had to play Magnus Carlsen in a match, how would you prepare? Well, Explorer World says that he would rather learn hypnosis or magic, may have more chance than actually working on chess. Yeah. Last resort, as I will offer spicy food one day before and hope for a quick draw. Happened, by the way, with Vidit and Magnus. It will be remembered for times to come. Yes, that was a one-move draw offer, wasn't it, between Vidit and Magnus?
I think it was maybe six
moves.
5 or 6 moves.
Super quick, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a 1 minute draw.
Okay, and George Gognatsa says that I would call them to buy the DeLorean time machine from Back to the Future, and we'll go back and forth until winning the match. Otherwise, I don't see any chance.
Very clever, original.
Definitely, but unfortunately, we do need the technology. But did you know, actually, we're now in the future? In the film, Back to the Future, they go to the future, and we've actually passed the future.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They
There's
go
no
to like
hoverboards.
20-something?
Yeah, it was like they go to 2019, I think, or something.
Wow.
And there was this big thing, where are the hoverboards?
True.
Okay, we have a move on the board.
Ivanka, I'm speechless. That move, just the fact that that's on Nakamura's radar is impressive, but it looks so weakening. It looks so counterintuitive. Look at White's pawns now. Suddenly, they are all lined up. He's made connect 4. He's made that kind of Mean Girls pawn structure that we were talking about, but those pawns are loose. The pawn, where it was defending everything. Why move it?
Because of a trap, David. Because if Black takes the pawn...
Okay, let's bring up the analysis board to explain this strange move by Nakamura. So he pushed this pawn forward, actually tempting Magnus Carlsen to play queen takes pawn in the centre. And as you say, this would be a small trap, because after the bishop steps forward, attacking the queen, there's only one safe square. The queen has to run to the corner. And suddenly, after the pawn pushes forward, this queen completely offside, not participating in the action. But yeah, I think Nakamura, he's going to regret the decision to push this pawn forward after Magnus's last move. The knight jumping forward into the position, eyeing up this pawn. He's played queen takes pawn, ignoring this attack, and after knight takes check, the white king suddenly a huge target. Where do you put it? I don't see it a safe square, really. Maybe you want to put it in the corner, but as soon as you put it in the corner, all Black needs to do is solve this attack against this rook, maybe by protecting it with his queen, and I think Black is fine. White's king is just too loose over on this side, and quite likely we're going to get this position on the board. There we go. Black retreating the queen, protecting this rook, also eyeing up some stuff. Teamwork with this dark squared bishop. I think that Nakamura may be just being too ambitious with his play and not finding the safest way to maintain his advantage.
Yeah, do you know what I suspect? I suspect that he saw this really nice idea and just calculated that, and he didn't actually take the time to think, hang on a second, what happens if Magnus doesn't accept the pawn and simply makes a different move? He was just too occupied with his own beautiful idea. And yeah, I agree with you, David. Totally dangerous for the White King now. And I'm slightly concerned that we're going to see a big turnaround in the position because White's king, is just creaky.
This is the type of stuff that Magnus was doing when he got punished in a few games earlier in the tour. Just slightly weakening your king. Might not look like much, but later on your opponent will always have chances. And okay, right now, Magnus, his knight is attacked. White's bishop attacking the black knight. He can retreat that knight. It's also slightly tempting for black to forget about that knight and for black's bishop to go down to the left side and take a white pawn attacking white's rook. So ignoring the attack on his own knight, but counter-attacking against the opponent's rook. It's tempting, it is committal though. The most natural move is to just retreat that knight. Nakamura, his best chance is probably just to hope that maybe a queen trade later on, which would secure the safety of his king and the two white bishops playing a role in the endgame. But that's a long way in the future. Nakamura still has many hurdles to overcome before we get there. Magnus, though, look at that, 40 seconds for the world champion. He's calculating something, and okay, it's not easy. Still, all three results possible. He does go for the move that I did mention. He does forget about the black knight. He's going after white's rook. So normally, you don't want to allow a trade of two pieces for a rook. But this time, he's gambling that at the end of things, if white, for example, plays bishop takes knight right now, the black bishop taking the rook, and after that bishop is captured, he's hoping that white's king will be vulnerable, and we're going straight for that position. Yeah, I mean, Jovanka, what do you think? Black's rook is now going to face off against two bishops. Who do you prefer?
Well, David, I think there's a huge blunder in the air. I mean, what is this? There's something has gone. I mean, what's happening? Why can you not play rook? Rook to attack the queen.
If black's rook attacks the queen, maybe the white queen will just retreat. I'm not sure where, but
okay.
We're going to find out. We're going to find out, Jovanka.
I just saw the bar and I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong. And yeah, okay, wasn't rook attacking the queen. There was a different move that could have been played.
Actually, yeah, the different move, the winning move. I just caught a glimpse there, just below the players' cameras. It was actually to play the queen to that square, but that's not obvious, offering a queen trade. So Magnus going for the human approach. So maybe, objectively, a small mistake by Nakamura, but you can forgive the players. I mean, they're never going to play perfect chess. Nobody does.
No.
And Magnus choosing a very logical approach, activating the black queen. White's king not entirely safe. There's already a semi-threat now. Black's queen eyeing up that bottom square, the bottom rank where White's king is trying to hide out. The black queen is threatening to infiltrate into White's camp. How do you stop that? It's not easy.
Well, you might not need to stop it because there might be some issues with Black's king.
So maybe the safest would, for example, for White to just step forward with the White king so that if the Black queen does come down, it doesn't come with tempo, it doesn't come with check.
Exactly. You know, just kind of solidify your king position because, you know, things are a little bit awkward with the Black king, especially because if you look at the king, it's surrounded by three pawns, and when the pawns are blocking in the king's escape route like that, the king is particularly vulnerable to mates that we call the back rank mate.
Yeah, so later on, Magnus, he will maybe move a pawn near the black king just to give a little bit of breathing space. You don't want to create any weaknesses, but you do need the king to breathe. And, okay, Nakamura, he's catching up on the clock now. He's losing his time advantage. It's not easy to handle for either side, this one. Probably slightly easier for black because of the safer king, but...
Plus, he only needs a draw.
And he only needs a draw. That's a big bonus in this type of position. Who do you think it would favour, Jovanka, if the queens leave the board?
Okay, if the queens leave the board, I'm definitely black. 100% black because of the passed pawns that are there on the left side. They're protected passed pawns, and those are going to get the queen. And if the queens are on the board, you know what? I'm liking white because there is a lot of danger. I mean, the point is that white has two pieces to continue an attack, whereas black only has one. And if you look at the white king is a little bit airy, I admit that. But if we look deeper, I think the white king is pretty safe.
Yeah, so traditionally, bishops worth 3 points each, black's rook worth 5. Black has an extra pawn as well, so black's rook and pawn, they're also worth 6. So 2 bishops against a rook and a pawn. It's level material, but 2 bishops, 2 pieces are better than 1, and often they outpower the rook. But right now, they're not coordinated perfectly, and Magnus giving a check. Nakamura, what's he thinking about? He has to block that one with the bishop or the knight.
Which one would you block with the knight?
My first instinct would be knight, because a knight's a king's best friend,
Yes.
just to kind of tuck it away, keep the king nice and safe. But if you can't use your knight later in the game, well, you might want to centralize it a bit later on.
That's true. So if you can't use your knight in the game, then you have to actually retreat with the bishop. So
Bishops are long-range pieces, so maybe it's better to plant a bishop further back in the board.
Okay, he's gone for the knight's best friend approach, and we have to remember that Hikaru is in a must-win situation.
Magnus is winning now. Hikaru's just blundered. He avoided the queen trade, but he's put his queen on the square, protecting the bishop in the corner. Now the queen is attacked. There's no way to save white's bishop in the corner. Nakamura resigns.
Wow, what an ending to the first day in the final. Hikaru Nakamura blundering, Magnus Carlsen winning the second game of today for him. And that means he is the winner of the first day in the final. What a dramatic first day between these two big online rivals. Magnus Carlsen walking out as the winner of day 1. How will he be feeling now? We saw a smile on his face.
Oh, he'll be ecstatic, you know, because he was on the verge of looking like it might be losing for him. Perhaps he was being outplayed, and I'm sure it must have been going through his mind, oh no, it's the same situation that he faced against Levon Aronian, where he was 1 point up and he lost the final game. But he will be absolutely fantastic, absolutely happy that he goes in tomorrow with 1 match lead.
All right. Well, David, you have to sort of give us the highlights. There were many in this game as well. And this analysis will be given to you by our sponsor, Lisoveta.